Okay. Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first State Board of Education working meeting of the year. I wish it was under better circumstances. As people know, because you're here, is we have postponed our meeting. It is normally the first Wednesday of the month. We postponed yesterday because, as we know, there was a mob attacking the Capitol, leading an insurrection perhaps, and we wanted, partly out of respect and concern for our members who live somewhere near there and not knowing what they would be facing over the course of the evening, we wanted to delay, and also just because it really seemed inappropriate for us to get along, to have a meeting and conduct business as usual while this was going on at the Capitol in our city. And I just want to note that this is the second time this year we have delayed for a terrible reason like this. Back in March, we delayed also by a day or maybe even by a week because our meeting coincided with the murder of George Floyd, and it was the height of the protest. So that seemed inappropriate to get together. Last night did, and here we are. I also just want to say to all of you and to everybody who's watching, you know, I've been on social media. I know you have, just sort of hearing about teachers and parents trying to struggle with how to present this to kids. I was on the phone with my young adult kids last night. It is very, very tough. And my heart goes out to everybody who's trying to wrestle with this. And I know I say that on behalf of everybody here. And it, of course, it raises for all of us the important stakes of our social studies committee and the importance of teaching our kids about democracy, about peaceful transfer of power, checks and balances, and all of that. And we will be hearing from our social studies committee later. We may want to raise some of these issues. So and people may want to talk more about this later on in the night, but I know we have folks from OSSE are here to talk with us, and I'm going to turn it right over to them. The one thing I want to say before we start is we have a brand new board here. Welcome, everybody. It is a terrific board. The experience that is represented here is extraordinary. I cannot wait to work with all of you. We have literacy experts. We have special ed experts. We have people who have been working in their communities for years. We have people from both sectors. We have parents. We have non-parents. It's really extraordinary. And I am so excited and so eager to tap all of your expertise. And with that, I think we're gonna, I guess that's my report for you guys. Like, I open it, that's my leadership report. That's what I want to start you off with. You've got the agenda in front of you. So I'm going to turn it to John Paul for an executive director report, and then we'll move straight to our report from OSSE and onto our other issues. And then at the end, we can also have new business for anything. Okay.
Thanks, Madam President. I just have a quick update related to our meeting schedule for this year. Members should have had a chance to review our draft calendar for this year. It will be on the agenda for the public meeting in next week to discuss the adoption of this calendar. In the past 3 or 4 years, it's been important for us to make sure that the public has access to the meeting calendar for the entire year from the beginning of the year, so that they can plan ahead and so that we can also plan ahead. And I do also want to offer an opportunity, if there's any of these dates that I've missed on holidays or that coincide with breaks that you know of for schools, certainly let me know. But I believe we have navigated all of the breaks that I know of and all of the important holiday dates that I know of. So between now and the public meeting, if you notice one that I missed, please do send it to me, and otherwise it'll be on the agenda.
And let me just say one thing: the rhythm of our meetings, as you may have figured out, is issues typically come up first of all in our working meeting here. We don't take votes here, but then those same issues may flow to the public meeting. So for example, with the calendar, we will adopt that formally at our public session in 2 weeks, or 2 weeks minus a day.
1 week.
In 1 week. Thank you, Board Member O'Leary. That is correct. It is in 1 week. All right. Oh, and let me just say while we're talking about that is normally our second meeting, our public meeting of the year is on the 3rd Wednesday, but that is Inauguration Day. And we figured that might be a rough day for all kinds of reasons to have our public meeting. So that's why that is next Wednesday. So for all of our public out there, as well as for our members, that is the plan. All right, and with that, Acting Superintendent Young, do I start with you, with Donna? Okay.
Hi, everyone, and nice to see you in what I keep saying is maybe potentially a happier new year, at least. Nice to see all of you again, and welcome to all the new members. I think I've spoken with each of you personally, and I'm really looking forward to working with you all. I believe that Donna Johnson, our Director of Accountability at OSSI, will be projecting for us today, and we have a couple of things on as part of this presentation. First is to share with you the status of the DC School Report Card, which shares comparable information across all of our public and schools, district and charter. And then to talk to you about the process that OSSI is undergoing to apply to the U.S. Department of Education for an addendum as it relates to parts of our accountability system. I think over the past several hours and the past day, I have never been more excited or proud to come to a public meeting and talk about the mundanity and banality of following the rules of a proper working government. And a lot of what we are sharing today is talking about how we are following the U.S. Department of Education's guidance and rules for potential changes or exemptions to parts of our system that we've all agreed on, the board and OSSI and the public over the past few years. So it will get weedy, but I'm looking forward to sharing that with you and walking you through that process. So Donna, I think if you have control to begin the presentation, we can project that. If not, John Paul, just let me know what we need to do. Can everyone
That
see
should
it?
be sharing now.
I see your full slideshow presentation. Can you put it into regular slideshow, or is that just everyone?
It should have been. Let's see. I'll try that again.
I think just regular slideshow mode versus presenter. There we go.
Great.
Thanks, Donna. So we can go to the first slide. As you know, the DC School Report Card gives families a look into all public schools in the district. We provide students with and families with comprehensive information about the performance of public schools. And it was built with the feedback of thousands of parents and families. And it features more than 150 data points per school, including data and information about academic programs, extracurricular activities, parent organizations, and more. Since the launch on December 3rd this year, previous year, we've had nearly 2,800 unique visitors who have viewed over 11,000 pages on the site, and over 106,000 unique users with 700,000 pages viewed since it was launched in December 2018. And on the most recent EdFest weekend, we had 550 unique users and over 700 sessions. They spent nearly 5 minutes on the site per person and visited 2,400 pages on the site. So it's very exciting to see that it's actually being used by our community in meaningful ways. Each year, we've added a few new visualizations and additional information to the report card. Even though this year, much of our data was limited, we still added some changes to the user experience and additional items based on the feedback of users. So we added our Instagram and social media contacts for schools, before and after care hours by day, in addition to the cost structure and teacher and school leader data. We've made some updates as well as this year, adding school finance details and a brochure to provide additional information. All of these are with the intent of making it more user-friendly and in response to feedback that we've received. the updates for 2020, given the impact of COVID-19, the Department of Education, U.S. Department of Education, granted waivers for state assessments and several accountability components. And the following table, which you can see in front of you, I won't read the whole thing, outlines the data, which data elements have updated information, and all other metrics have school performance data from prior years labeled and displayed. So additionally, additional data from the previous year will be shared outside the report card in times when publishing it would not have been equivalent on the website. So we will still continue to publish data that exists. As you can see here, attendance, mobility, discipline will be published later on when they are generally released for the prior year. So in the next section, I will hand it over to Donna to talk through our Essa accountability and flexibility. As you know, last year during the year, as we mentioned, the U.S. Department of Education provided specific waivers for assessments in the year and waivers for the publication of certain data. This year, the upshot is they have created a slightly different process that allows states relief from the parts of their accountability systems which they are unable to accomplish because of this lack of data. And so we will be talking through here the process that OSSI has to go through to submit our addendum and waiver to be relieved of those requirements, which exist as part of our approved Essa plan. So we are not reapproving the plan. We are not amending the plan. We're just taking opportunity that the U.S. Department of Education gives to get relief from those areas which we could not accomplish anyway because the data does not exist. And so with that, I will just hand it off to Donna, and I will be happy to jump in as well as needed.
Thank you, Shauna. And good evening to all of the board members, especially those new board members that I have not yet met. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Donna Johnson. I'm the Director of Accountability at OSSI, and I'm excited to provide an overview of this flexibility that we are planning to submit a proposal or request for. Wanted to outline for everyone what aspects of the Every Student Succeeds Act are included when we talk about Essa accountability components. I know there are a lot of things that oftentimes come to mind when we think about accountability, and I thought, especially since we have so many new members, it would be great just to frame the conversation around the limitations of this flexibility and what it really means when we talk about Essa accountability. So we're really talking about the long-term goals that are outlined in the state plan. And those long-term goals are around three specific components. It's academic achievement in English, language, arts, and math, the graduation rate for 4-year ACGR, which is the adjusted cohort graduation rate, and how we measure English language proficiency, which is through the progress that our students who are English learners, the progress that they make on the access assessment. There are also specific indicators, which we have a slide a little bit later that details what those indicators are. And they're broken up into what are referred to as domains within the Every Student Succeeds Act. There's academic achievement, academic progress, graduation rate, our progress in English language proficiency, and then the fifth dimension, which is school quality and school success indicators. And we have quite a few elements that are within that, but those are the 5 domain areas that are outlined in Essa that all states had to submit metrics for their system of annual meaningful differentiation. So all of those metrics go into the required system of annual meaningful differentiation. For us, that system is the School Transparency and Reporting Framework, which we refer to as the STAR framework. The other component of Essa accountability is the school improvement identification, which includes the timeline, the methodology, and the exit criteria. And those school improvement designations are comprehensive support and targeted support. Targeted support is specifically looking at schools with low performing or chronically underperforming student groups as compared to the whole school. And then the comprehensive support schools are those schools who are in the bottom 5% of all performance, or those with 67% or lower graduation rates. Knowing that we do have a number of new board members, And I wanted to provide an overview of our system of annual meaningful differentiation. I know many of you on the board are very familiar with this system, but I wanted to make sure that it was clear for those who needed a reminder or were new to the system. And I do want to give a huge shout out to the prep materials that I saw that you guys received ahead of time. The pre-reading really gave a great outline for providing the STAR brochure, gave you links to the technical guide, as well as a number of other resources that we have on our public website about the STAR framework. And so I'm happy to answer questions or provide additional information at any other time if you have questions about that. But I just wanted to give this framework and this overview of what our system of annual meaningful differentiation is. As we talked about, it's got the 5 components, and then it breaks down into the points that are allocated per domain there. And those are the domains that are outlined within the requirements of the Essa plan. And then for clarification, listed all of the different metrics that fall within each of those domains so that you understood where the different metrics, where they fall into the different components of the STAR framework. So give a little background around where we are with the accountability system. As you heard Shauna talk about, in March, US Ed granted DC, as well as every other state in the country, a waiver from the statewide annual assessments, as well as many of the accountability requirements under Essa, not all of them, but many of them. That meant that we did not administer statewide assessments in 1920. That was the Park assessment, our alternative assessment for Ela and Math, as well as our English language proficiency assessment and our science assessment. All of our schools then moved into a remote setting in March and remained there for the rest of the school year. In the fall, as you know, many of our students returned to school in a variety of ways, some remote, some hybrid, some in-person learning, and we continue to be in that status currently. OSSI provided a great number of guidance documents, put all of them on our website. We've adjusted attendance policies that you've been talking about for the last several months as well, and continue to adjust that assessment guidance and thinking about how we can best support our schools and provide them the assistance and guidance that they need to fulfill the requirements. In late October, U.S. Department of Ed announced a new round of Essa flexibility specifically for accountability only, whereas in March, there was flexibility that included reporting, included accountability, included assessment. This round of flexibility was limited to those accountability components that I talked about in the very beginning slide in this section. Then, as you heard Shauna talk about, December 3rd, we published our DC report cards with the limited data that we had and fulfilling the requirements that were not waived in that March waiver that was received back in March 2020. So a little bit about the new flexibility option. The new flexibility option is called the Essa Addendum. Provided on this slide is a link that gives you an overview of what the template for that addendum is, outlines the components where flexibility is provided and the options of flexibility that are given by US Ed. So it's a very limited set of accountability flexibilities. It's not an open book. So they have some very narrow things that you can take flexibility options for. This was really viewed as an extension of the waivers. As you heard Shauna talk about, there is a large number of data elements that are required from the prior school year to implement our state plan as approved and to fulfill our accountability system, the metrics, this annual system of meaningful differentiation, as well as school improvement. And without that data, it's impossible to actually implement the plan as approved. You'll also see a link to the FAQ from US Ed that is available on their website that was originally out for public comment. That public comment period ended a month after it was published, and that FAQ is still posted and available for review. The process for submission was that all agencies that wished to seek this needed to provide their submission through the streamlined template by February 1st. So a little bit about OSSI's plan for this flexibility. We talked about where the components would be. So what we're doing is we're submitting this accountability addendum, this Essa addendum. And the big picture is that we are looking for and asking that we not calculate our system of annual meaningful differentiation. That is our STAR framework, using data from the school year 2020-21. We were also in line to have new identifications of school improvement. That would have been the time period in which we would have had every 3 years, we were identifying new schools for comprehensive support and targeted support. And we're looking to request not to make those designations in 2021. And the flexibility that is available is to shift that timeline forward 1 year. And if you think about the fact that we had a waiver the prior year, that really means that the waiver of the prior year created a null system, and it shifts the timeline forward 1 year. Additionally, there are some things within the template that the template cannot waive. And USED communicated that information to states and said, because of the limitations in the template, states would have to submit a waiver to get flexibility around some of the other elements that they knew were going to be challenging for states to complete, such as identification of targeted support, which is an annual identification based on low student group performance. The fact is that we did not have STAR framework scores or student group scores last year, and we have in our addendum not to calculate them this year. That makes it impossible to identify schools that have a low student group score when we don't have framework scores at all. So we're submitting a waiver for the annual designation of targeted support 1 schools. And because of the impact that growth has, knowing that we do not have state assessment scores from last year, and this year we are looking to have a variety of different testing models, we are requesting the waiver of those targeted support schools for not just this year, but also for next year. Right now, all of our targeted support schools are elementary and middle schools, which have their heaviest weighted component is academic growth. We are also asking for a waiver to not administer our DC science assessment and alternative science assessment, which is the dynamic learning maps for this school year. A little bit about the timeline for this. We published our addendum components on the OSSE website on the 17th of December. We engaged LEAs that week in informing them of our intent and giving them an outline of what this flexibility included. We have this opportunity to share this information with you. We will be meeting with the Title I Committee of Practitioners on the 21st of January. We also have additional meetings with other stakeholders set up in the rest of this month before submitting in February. We have it posted currently for public comment, and we will be reviewing the public comments that are received prior to submission on February 1st. Few details about the flexibility. I went over the 5 components: long-term goals, annual meaningful differentiation, indicators, identification of schools, and the exit criteria. On this slide, I'm not going to read all of these elements to you. It just gives you a highlight of what we are asking not to do. On the long-term goals, essentially what we're doing is we're treating the 1920 school year as a null year, meaning that we did not have to calculate long-term goal progress. We didn't have the data to calculate long-term goal progress on 2 out of the 3 long-term goals. So we are shifting those forward 1 year. So that timeline simply moves to the right. The accountability metric indicators, as we talked about, these metric indicators are broken into 5 components, and they roll into our annual system of meaningful differentiation. And so you'll see broken down here the different components within the academic achievement, and we are requesting flexibility of not using this data to roll into our annual system of meaningful differentiation, which is our STAR framework. We also know that we cannot calculate growth as outlined in our Essa plan because we do not have state assessment data from last year, and we do not have access data from last year. So we cannot calculate access growth, which is our ELP, our English language proficiency indicator, as required. We are also asking not to use these items for STAR framework data. So we have to outline each one of the indicators and outline what they are, and request and explain why we are not able to calculate them, talk about the limitations to the data. As you heard Shauna talk about at the very beginning, this is really talking about the data that is not available or the data that has a lack of comparability. And under school improvement designations, just to give a quick overview of the types of school improvement designations, we have 4 different types, 3 of which we have identified during our first year. Our Comprehensive Support 1 or CS1 is the lowest 5%. CS2 or Comprehensive Support 2 are the high schools with graduation rates for both 4 and 5 year that are below 67%. Our Targeted Support 1, as I talked about before, are the chronically underperforming low student group performance. So those student groups are performing lower than the overall school performance of the bottom 5% schools. And then a category that is an escalation of that TS1 is called TS2. They're only identified every 3 years. We were on track to designate those for the first time this coming year, since we don't have prior data to look at our targeted support schools and be able to know which of those schools have exited, have made the improvements. We are pushing that forward as well, since we don't have that prior data to base that designation. As I talked about before, the additional flexibility requests are the waiver for TS1 schools for both data from the 2021 school year and the 21-22 school year, and then the waiver from administration of the DC Science Assessment. As you are all aware, the waiver is published on the OSSE website, and we are collecting public comment through January 22nd. We do recognize the importance and the meaningfulness of the data that we are able to collect and able to measure. We know that it is used in a variety of ways, and we know how important it is. We know that it's important to be transparent with that data, and we are committed to reviewing all of the available data and making sure that we are working with all of our stakeholders to make sure that the information that we do provide from this school year is provided in a manner that is both an appropriate use of data, is a transparent use of data, and is something that is meaningful and useful for the public, for the schools, and for those that are utilizing this data to inform any discussions, decisions, policy actions. And so that's something that we have committed to do, to continue that conversation with the stakeholders around how we are able to provide this data in the most responsible way. And with that, take any questions that you have.
So folks, if you have questions, you can either physically raise your hand or hit the chat. I mean, the raise your hand icon. I see Fraser.
Yes, thank you. That was very comprehensive. The new Department of Education that will begin in a couple of weeks, is that going to affect anything about the Essa requirements or anything like that? Or is that just something that's in stone without having, and I have a couple of other questions. Should I just ask the questions and then you answer them, or do you want to go back and forth? It's fine with me. I don't care.
How would you prefer?
I'll just read my questions and then you can answer them. How about that? So that's the first question about the new department. I just am wondering about how it goes with a transition like that. If you get the waivers, how will school year 21-22 affect the fact that we don't have anything to compare scores with like we do this year? So if you get to 21-22 and we have no idea what this year is, let's assume, just for the sake of argument, that most schools are not going to be back in school until next year. So that all of the learning that's going on in all of the schools is different through every single computer that we're looking at. So when we get to 21, 22, and hopefully we'll be back into the buildings and education will be going on every day like it's supposed to. It would seem to me that when the tests are given, so in 21, 22, that the scores might be like dramatically different than they are in 20, I'm talking about 20, this is 2021, whatever the scores are this year, that next year that they're going to be dramatically different. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but just say that it is. Do you already have you already talking about how you're going to maneuver that so that you can have a real actual comparison with the scores? And I think that's it.
I'll take a first stab and then toss it over if my staff wants to jump in if I got anything wrong. I think those are really important questions, Fraser, and thank you for raising them. As it relates to transition, the majority of the Essa requirements that you are seeing us address here are written into law or regulation. The U.S. Department of Education has issued guidance here that it sets a process for us to waive or to have an addendum to be relieved of some of those responsibilities. The responsibilities themselves are written down and are not changing. The process that the administration has is over in what way and how and what they may give the waivers that they are eligible to give to us. We don't anticipate, it's hard to anticipate anything these days with transition, I would say. And so we are operating that the guidance we have is the guidance we're going to have. And talking to other states and other policy guidance, that's what they recommend, because we do not know under what circumstances and how long it will take for any new administration to come in and what their intention may or may not be as to changing this. So far, this gives us a very reasonable path forward to ask for these for this relief, and so we're going to take it. And if and when that changes, we would address that. But the timeline that we're working under for having to make these decisions at the local level is now. And so we're going to move forward with those, and we'll react to anything else if it comes. I don't anticipate much else coming in a timely manner, given the timeline that these people take to even come in and get confirmed and staff and make policy decisions. But obviously, if anything does change, we would let you and the public know if there were any changes we would make. I think as it relates to the next year, I think that's also a great question. And it is something that we are thinking about now. It's just not something that we have full answers to right now.
Right.
We do not know the circumstances that we'll be in next year and or what other policy decisions they would make at the national level. And we do know, as Donna mentioned, that we will not have full comparable data from this year, or the data we have this year will be different. And so don't think it's a particularly great idea to make declarative statements or really big decisions right now, but it is absolutely something we will be thinking of at the end of this spring and moving into next year as to how and if and how they would be comparable and how we would use them. I think just what we've learned over the past couple of years is it is better to take it one step at a time and then come when we have a full set of information with us. But those considerations are exactly the same ones we are thinking about, which is if and how we can use the data and in what way.
Great. I have one other question, and that is summer school in 2021. Is that something I would hope that there would be a big push to make sure that a lot of our students went to summer school this summer to catch back up wherever they are, so that when the semester starts in August of 2021, that we wouldn't have a huge gap, a learning gap, like it probably was this past August. Is that anything that's in the conversation with you and all of the LEAs?
I know for a fact that our LEAs are thinking very thoroughly right now about what recovery learning looks like and over what timeline, and that our LEAs are thinking right now about the spring and the summer, as well as next year, actually. And I think they're thinking, as we all are, about what the knowns are and how to best deliver education over that time. And summer school is one thing that I have certainly heard a number of LEAs discussing. The decision about their operating status and in what way they would provide that would be at the LEA level. But OSSE certainly attempts to do our best to provide technical assistance and guidance and support and flexibilities where possible to help LEAs have all of those options at their disposal.
Thank you. That's fabulous. Appreciate it.
Madam
Do you
President,
want me
you're
to-
muted.
Jessica.
Is that me? Okay, thank you. Thanks, President Wattenberg, and thank you, Donna and Shauna, for this great presentation. I just have one question. So the note about no new designations, keeping the same schools. Can you just talk to us a little bit about what those designations have meant this year as schools are sort of struggling? I would say all of our LEAs are struggling, but the schools that were identified for support, what has that looked like this year and what might it look like next year since there's no change in designation?
Donna, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So part of the waiver from March required as one of the requirements of accepting the waiver that states agreed to support those designated schools in the same manner in which they had been supported before. So that meant that they continued to receive additional school improvement funding and that their data was being reviewed and they were kind of being monitored and things of that sort. So one of the things that you may recall from our Essa plan is that we work directly with the LEAs. In this case, we have 8 schools from DCPS who are receiving funding as CS1 schools. And those schools are working directly with their school improvement team at DCPS. In January, we reviewed the progress that they were making and had presentations from, I should say, not January. I think it was, I have to look back at the date. So it wasn't January. I want to say maybe July, but it was over the summer before they started. It was one of those J months. But they gave us a presentation update of how they were doing on their school improvement plans, reviewed data, and talked about how they were shifting their supports and the focus based on the changes to the learning instruction models that they were using within their school and thinking about the progress and the things that they had been doing and what they had been able to monitor and measure. They had made some adaptations to how they were reviewing their attendance. A number of them had chronic absenteeism concerns, and they were talking about how they were going out and engaging and reaching out to schools, to students and families. So those are things that we continue to monitor, and our school improvement office works and meets with the DCPS liaisons monthly to talk about the compliance that they have. And this is really the DCPS office has been managing the direct contact with the schools. And then OSSE's role is to monitor how the LEA is choosing to support those schools. The funding is allocated to the LEA, and then the LEA distributes that funding based on how they are supporting the plans and where the fiscal allocations are within each of those plans. All of those plans are available on OSSE's website, as well as the presentations and things that the school has submitted along with them. For the targeted support schools, those are also identified annually. They develop a plan and they work directly with their LEA, or in the case of a charter, with PCSB as a charter authorizer to identify specific goals that they are going to establish based on whichever student group was identified as low performing. And then those DCPS monitors or PCSB monitors go in and monitor that and then report back to OSSE. And there's no funding assigned to targeted support schools. The federal funding is limited to Comprehensive Support 1, which is the lowest 5%. And just as a reminder for those that are new, that was a total of about $11 million over 3 years.
And so Donna, just one other follow-up, the 8 schools in DCPS and that 11 million over 3 years is now 11 million over 5 years, or is 11 million dispersed over the first 3 and then sort of a no cost extension in 2 years?
I will have to confirm with our grants management, but my understanding is that the federal government has continued that funding.
Okay.
But I will have to get the follow-up with the exact values of what that looks like.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Mhm. Thank you, Justin.
Carleen.
Thank you, President Wattenberg. So I think I have 5 questions, but I think one of them, Jessica, or Representative Sutter may have asked already in regards to the TA, the technical assistance, and it seems like it's primarily on the LEA.
It is primarily on the LEA. The LEA converses with OSSI around how they are providing the technical assistance outlined in the plan.
Okay.
I will say there is a large number of professional development opportunities that are targeted towards a number of those low performing schools, things that are online now, professional development. Other times they may have been in-person professional learning opportunities that are sponsored through our teaching and learning branch, our health and wellness that might be dealing with chronic absenteeism, our PCE, which is post-secondary CTE programs, those types of things, those professional learning opportunities are still available through different OSSI teams, and based on data, targeted those schools and encouraged them to participate, and then work directly with, in this case, DCPS, to engage them in making sure that they are taking advantage of all of the professional learning and supports that are available.
Okay, and I'm just going to ask my next few questions just in a list. So is there any way to anticipate the designations for school year 22? Can schools opt into technical assistance, which is something sometimes done to prevent possibly a designation? Could we, or I guess, it seemed like schools were queued up for a designation, and I was just wondering, were they receiving any types of support? And then the last one is, I think Justin may have answered in the chat, where can we find a list of the designated schools?
Yeah, I'll let Donna jump in, but I think that we do not anticipate designations, and it would depend on what the process is for designating if and when we have the data to do so. And I think one of the reasons we do want statewide data in general about outcomes, be them academic or otherwise, is to assist and understand which schools are improving and which ones are struggling. And we do look at that data every year. And as Donna said, use that to identify what professional development OSSI is putting out and technical assistance, as well as helping to offer it to schools who look like they might be struggling in any given area, or match LEAs in schools with areas where they could improve or where it looks like there's demonstrated need. I don't think so. In that sense, it's less about anticipating a designation and more about proactively using the data we have statewide to share back with the LEAs so that they can use it themselves and so that we can use it to target that professional development. And we spend a lot of time at OSSI thinking about, we are always responsive to requests for technical assistance in any of the areas we're talking about, academic or in areas like discipline support, post-secondary, and other career education access. But we're also consistently looking to continuously improve how we reach out to LEAs and make our assistance and trainings meaningful to help those schools close gaps.
One of the things that I would add, Carleen, is that one of the requirements of the Every Student Succeeds Act is also that in addition to providing the information to schools and LEAs around who's the bottom 5%, is that proactively each year, when we obviously have the data, we provide information to our schools, even if it's not a designation year. If they were in the bottom 5%, we also identify and notify all of the schools who are in the bottom 10%, letting them know that they're in the bottom 10%. And then we also provide to the LEA and to PCSB what that threshold is in terms of the number that is used for identifying the bottom 5%. There is never an opportunity not to have a bottom 5%, even if all of our schools were scoring 95% and above, we would still have a bottom 5%. And the federal law requires that you identify the bottom 5%. They don't set a cut score or a threshold that must be below. So you must have a bottom 5% no matter how high performing or how low performing they are. There will always be a bottom 5%.
Carlene, you good? You're, all right,
Yes, I'm good. Yield to someone else.
okay. Zach.
Thank you. And apologies in advance. I had to jump on a little late because of a conflict. If you've already spoken to my question, I largely have two. One is around the administration of Park this year. It's my understanding the waiver is for every other assessment besides Park and Math and Ela. And although that's not going to count towards accountability for this year, it seems like we're trying to gather some baseline data. Can you just speak to what uses you're anticipating using that data for? Because in the addendum, it seems like you're explaining away and saying that that data is essentially not useful for the accountability plan, which I would agree with. I would also agree with the baseline data would be useful. I guess my concern is if we have thoughts or concerns about testing fidelity, if you will, what types of plans are you thinking of using? So that would be my first question. And I could just speak to my second question, which is, given that we're talking about a testing waiver for this school year, which totally makes sense. I'm sorry, accountability waiver for this school year. Donna, I saw your face. I'm like, sorry about that. It seems like based in the document that we are anticipating going back to the accountability system for next year. One, is that accurate? And then two, what type of bridge support or what are you expecting to happen between this school year and next to make sure we're accounting for the inevitable learning loss that is happening due to school closures and other things?
Sure, I'll start. And I think that's a sneaky big question you snuck in there, Zach, at the very end.
One is what are the intents for the assessments this year? And then two, am I accurate in thinking accountability will resume next year? And are we anticipating, planning to support schools in that transition from no accountability to back to accountability, given everything we're going through?
Yeah, yes, these questions make a lot of sense. And I have a similar set of answers probably to what we talked about with Fraser. So there's a couple of sort of baseline things here, which is we did not have assessments last year. And so even when we assess this year, we would have a gap. And so we are saying that we would not be able to have a score for the STAR framework at the end of this year, because the growth, as we know, is a very high priority in our system. And so that's what we are asking for the waiver from doing is to have the designations. And I will let Donna go through the technicalities, because I think some of the things that you articulated maybe aren't quite nuanced, right, Zach, about what's allowable. What we're saying is that so therefore we are asking for a waiver to not create designations at the end of this year. Subsequently, we are not making a commitment as to what to use that data for. Besides that, we want to use it to the extent that it is meaningful and be transparent about it as much as possible. We will assess this year. We will take a look at the data. We'll analyze it with our technical experts as well and figure out in what way it can be used and shared in ways that are meaningful. I think the question about anticipation is a logical one, but I think what we do know is that we are not able for certain to know right now what we will use it for in the future. But we're very intent on not using it for something that it does not make sense to use it for, right? And so we do anticipate that there will be gaps. And next year, we do not know what flexibility we would have or what other extenuating circumstances there may be, but we do anticipate that there will be some other types of flexibility or nuances that the U.S. Department of Ed will put out. We just don't know what they are right now. And so we don't, similarly, we don't really, given what we know about our system, which is heavily weighted on growth, which takes multiple years of comparable data, we anticipate that we may have other considerations next year we're just not sure what they are right now. So we're just trying to, again, to take it one step at a time and to use this year as a way of modeling what that would look like next year if we're in this situation again, or if there's other options on hand, how we would come and talk to you about them. And Donna, can you explain a little bit more of the nuances about the addendum and waiver?
Yes, absolutely. So, Zach, I think you may have joined after I'd gotten through the first slide. And what I really tried to outline was that this flexibility that is granted by the U.S. Department of Ed is limited to those 5 areas of accountability components within Essa. So there is no flexibility that has been offered or that has been positively discussed from US Ed, and we can't project what that would look like moving forward. But one of the things that we recognized was that our schools, our educators, our students, our families needed to have that understanding and the information that we were going to be able to utilize and take advantage of the flexibilities that are available right now. We did not think that it was the best thing to do to wait to see if new flexibilities came about in April or March. So utilizing the flexibilities that were made available now was the decision. And then looking forward to see what comes in the future is certainly something that we will always review, that available flexibilities if more are provided. But one of the things that we also know is very important is something you touched on, is the fact that we need to know how our students are doing. We need to know where additional supports are needed. And that's not just about state assessment data, but it's about attendance, about engagement. It's about a variety of things that we are able to collect data on. And the way in which we analyze that is going to be very different. The way in which we communicate it to the public has to be different, because we have to make sure that the public is using data responsibly, but we also have to make sure that we're providing data that's meaningful, not just to our schools and our educators, but to the public as well. I hope that answered your question.
Super helpful. I'm just going to repeat back very quickly what I think I'm hearing. We're going to do the assessment, see what we can get from it, determine what's valuable about it, and we don't really know what flexibility is going to be available in the future. And so we'll cross that bridge when the time comes. But this is getting us on the path of trying to resume our accounting of where our schools are.
Yeah, one thing to think about, Zach, is that this addendum is not a long-term change to our Essa plan. This is a short-term flexibility.
Gotcha.
So this is not making a long-term lasting change. That would be made through a more formal amendment, which you guys would talk about and provide feedback to us on. This is really just using a very narrow scope of flexibility in a template that's been provided by US Ed.
Thank you.
Emily?
Thank you. Most of my questions have been answered, so thank you to all the members who have asked them. I did have just a quick question, actually. I know this is not going to be on the actual framework, but I noticed there is a discipline metric that will be reported out separately. And I was just curious about what that is going to be based on. What is the discipline metric?
Sure.
Is there something, standard across schools, or I'm just really curious what they're doing. So that's
Happy to answer that, Emily. This is a requirement of the Every Student Succeeds Act, is that every state must report the discipline metrics that are collected through the civil rights data collection, which includes suspensions, both in school and out of school, expulsion, school-related arrest, bullying, harassment. All of those things that are collected through the civil rights data collection are and have always been on our report card under the school environment tab. So you can see those for all of our schools as well. Now, the collection for that was interrupted last year, so we will be releasing that data through the discipline report that comes out. We release a discipline report annually. And so that data was not updated on this school year, on this year's report card, but it will be included in the discipline report that will be released shortly. I don't know the exact date of that, but I know that it comes out relatively soon.
Great, thank you. And then this is not so much a question, I guess, but more a recommendation. I know that the stars that schools had, when they were last calculated,
Fall of 2019 was the last time we published them. Yes.
Yeah, so that's going to remain now. And I just would recommend that we reconsider that because the stars indicate something, right? And they're meant to be meaningful. And since they don't indicate what schools are doing now, I think that it doesn't make a lot of sense to have them there. Because it sort of says like this school is a 1-star school, but that is not necessarily accurate at this point. So it's just a recommendation.
Alex?
Thanks, Ruth. I had a couple questions actually. I was away for a little bit. I had to go take care of my puppy, so I missed the first half of the presentation. But for the Ela and Math Assessment, just to make sure I heard you guys correctly, you guys plan on still offering those 2 assessments?
Yes.
Okay. And will they be offered virtually for students to take or in person?
Yes, both. Offered both ways.
Cool. Yeah, those were pretty much my only questions. I just wanted to make sure I understood, but thank you guys.
Sure.
Okay, seeing no other hands, I'm going to go. Oh, no, okay. I take that back. Alistair got his up very quickly and then Ebony.
So Ebony,
Ebony, you're not leaving early, are you? Or are you?
I might be.
Go,
I will.
Okay,
I'm not leaving yet. Go ahead, Alistair.
would you help place what DC is doing relative to what other states are doing, so we can kind of get a better sense of where we are relative? And what are where are we unique in how we're responding? Where are we similar? Where are we different?
So one of the things, and I know that all of you are NASB members, and so you may have received your NASB bulletin today, and the leading article in that bulletin that you got in your email was about what other states are doing. And one of the things that I would highlight is that it really varies what states are asking for in this template based on their state plan. As well as the structure of their schools and how much of their school is in-person learning versus how much of it is still remote. One of the things that I have noted through contact that I have with other accountability directors in other states is that states that have a large majority of remote learning, hybrid learning, are very much in the same path that we are in. So when I think of our neighboring states, Maryland, Delaware, New Jersey, I am not absolutely certain the direction Virginia is gone. I know they published something recently, but I'm not sure if they've finalized their addendum yet. Number of states, most states that I'm aware of are submitting an addendum. The things that they're asking for vary based on what data they have available and the types of data that they collect in their system. One of the things that I will note is that our neighboring states are pretty much taking the same path forward that we're taking in terms of utilizing the flexibility to push the designation window forward, to not use 1920 data, to require schools that were in school improvement to use data from that year to exit. They are waiving their annual system of meaningful differentiation. They are looking to find opportunities to not calculate growth because of missing data, much the same things that we're looking at. And in fact, I know the number of states that have submitted their Essa addendum as well as waivers are asking for the 2-year waiver on targeted support, just as we have put into our proposal.
Okay, all right, Ebony.
Thank you. My question actually kind of builds on what some of Representative Parker was asking around like how we use data and our expectations for schools. I'm particularly struck by something you said, Ms. Johnson, around trying to anticipate schools' needs and not just thinking about data for accountability purposes. I'm curious in this year where we question both what data we'll have, and if it's good data, how OSSI is thinking about that anticipation. Like how do you do that? How can you support schools, whether they're in that designation, no matter what their designation status is?
Or, I mean, I think there's a large number of ways to answer that question. And I think, you know, in entering this year, OSSI thought a lot about what was going to be important for schools to focus on this year, which is why we created a continuous education set of guiding principles and a plan that schools and LEAs had to submit to talk about how they were going to be focused on those key principles moving forward through the year, and their commitment to maintaining focus and services for our students that need it most, and also their plans for remote learning and that focus on academics. In reviewing those plans, we use those to think about what other supports and technical assistance folks might need, including in OSSI's case, specifically thinking a little bit about the technical assistance around providing supports for students with disabilities, as well as thinking about our professional development offerings, tailoring them to areas that we saw either gaps or needs, or areas that we thought schools would be focused on. So that's one way. I think that, you know, there are other data partners who have also published interesting information on this. I believe Empower K-12 came out with an interesting report in which they collected data from partner LEAs to talk about where gaps were and encourage that conversation citywide about how schools could be accommodating that. Sorry, I've got a little buddy over here. And so we're not just looking at summative data, but helping LEAs themselves to be looking at their own data and thinking about how they can be responsive to those student needs.
Are there, maybe I should ask, are there trends you're seeing in what schools need support around, or where there might be even like questions of what's good data? So like I think about attendance and engagement, and like how do we measure attendance in a pandemic? And I know that's something that OSSI absolutely cares about. Like I'm curious, like what are the things you're seeing across, since some of this you all can see across, and like what would you flag that rises to that level?
Yeah, I think Justin has done a lot of work in the attendance space, and maybe he could drop some of our attendance policy links if they're easily available as well. We came to the board earlier late last year to talk about and get approval of our attendance regs, which changed the definition for this remote year. We're in the middle at OSSI of looking at preliminary trends at attendance and what that is looking like. I mean, I think anecdotally, it is obviously a very different, very different to be taking attendance, both based on participation and presence, and LEAs define that different ways, in ways that I think are actually very meaningful for the different schools and LEAs, and meaningful at different grade levels. Our LEAs, anecdotally, present the same sort of spectrum of concerns as that our families do from the other side, right? It can be very challenging. There are technical difficulties. However, people are getting used to new ways of engaging in work. And that is actually working well in many cases, and in other times it is more challenging. But I do think that schools are trying to accommodate the ways their students are learning, specifically related to presence. So I think we're in the middle of getting together actually some more, some preliminary results that we could share from some of the early data. I don't have anything like formally public to share. But I feel like our folks have been pretty nimble comparatively to many other places, which is heartening, I think.
I think one of the other things to keep in mind as well is that when we talk about looking at and talking with our LEAs around the data that they believe would be most useful is one of the things that we said we were committed to engaging and working with our LEAs, and we meet with our data managers monthly. One of the things that we've done over the last several months is to really engage those data managers from each of our LEAs and talking about how they're using data, having them share with other LEAs some of the trends that they're seeing, and talking about the needs that they have and how presenting that data is going to be most useful to them. And that's something that I'm excited about engaging our LEAs with as we move forward and thinking about how we provide this data from this very unique school year back to them.
All right. So this is great and super complicated. So for my questions, I am largely going to try to confirm or deny things that I think I've learned, but perhaps learned wrongly. So the first, I tried to do this in the chat, but I realized I ended up maybe creating more confusion than not. But going back to the targeted assistance designation. So you're proposing not to designate again. So my question is this, tell me if I have this right. We already extended all the targeted assistance schools 1 year, even though we didn't have all the data needed to do so. So we just extended everyone another year. And this is a request to do it a second year. So my question is, is this a second year? And then related to that, does that mean these 3-year schools will go for 5 years, or fix those numbers for me?
So targeted assistance schools are
I didn't mean to, I'm sorry. I meant comprehensive assistance.
Oh, okay. Okay. Different answer then.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. That was.
So the comprehensive support 1 schools are slated to be identified every 3 years. We identified them for the first time in December of 2018. They then developed a plan, submitted that plan to their LEA by May of 2019 for approval. Those plans were then submitted to OSSE. Schools then began implementing that plan, whether it was in the spring of 2019, where some of them began their implementation, some of them began their implementation over the summer, or fully in the fall of the 1920 school year. So they were in the midst of the implementation of their plan. What the waiver provided was the opportunity to count the 1920 school year as a null year in terms of not holding it against them. They received funding. They implemented the components of their plan. They continued to work on improving their school. This year, they were supported in that same manner. They received their school improvement funding, and we were on a schedule to designate new school improvement schools, new CS1 schools, in the fall of 21. However, we didn't have 3 years of data of which to base whether those schools could exit or not. So we're pushing that forward a year. Now, within the law as well, as you are probably aware, the law also provides an opportunity for schools to be making progress towards that and be extended an additional year. There's also the requirement that if after all of those reviews are made and we don't see that schools are exiting, then it is up to the state education agency to take additional actions, and then those would be outlined. We haven't reached that point yet, and we're still probably about 2 years away from having the data to even begin considering what that next phase looks like. In our state plan, that's called Comprehensive Support 3. And so as you take a look at that, that would definitely be something to look at down the road. Right now, we're utilizing the flexibility, and the flexibility in the Essa addendum only allows us to shift that timeline forward 1 year for comprehensive support 1 schools. It does not allow for a multiple year shifting. It allows just a shifting forward of 1 year because of the waivers in the 1920 school year.
So, okay, so I get that partly, but all right. So for most schools, just to put it on a common school year basis, year 1 was 2019-20. They're continuing in 2020-21 because they were already going to be doing that. And then in 2021-22, you would have identified a new set. You're not going to do that because we don't have the adequate year data. So those 2019-20 identified schools will continue at least through 2021-22. Okay. All right. Thank you. Second, I just want to confirm that because part of what this waiver is doing is because we don't have the growth scores to make the long-term, make judgments on the long-term indicators, we're proposing to have no star rating in December 2021. Is that correct? So we'll have 2 years with those star ratings?
That is correct.
And that is true also for the high schools?
That's true for all schools.
So I just want to say, I really appreciate that, because I know you guys were in the middle of trying to figure out the growth for the high schools, and it would be very unfortunate to have to go back without doing the growth. You probably had some leeway on that. And so I just want to say, I really appreciate insofar as you chose not to rate them without that growth data. Very appreciated. And third, I just really want to just let's see. Oh, for the park assessments given this spring, they're going to be given online. And to what extent does anybody know the extent to which those scores are going to be comparable to test scores that weren't the result of online? In other words, is proctoring different? I mean, what do you know about that? Or do we know anything?
I think we anticipate needing to take a look at the data and then assess after we administer it. And we'll be looking at a number of things similarly, but we do anticipate that one of the reasons we asked for some of the waivers we did is that it would not necessarily, we cannot rely on it to be fully comparable.
So this really falls in the category of what you were describing, which is we'll see what the data is and then we'll figure out how much to use it.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think
I didn't fully get that connection. It's great.
Yeah.
That sounds good. And then my last one, I really just want to second what Emily said, which is I think it was very fair not to have the star ratings this December. I think it was very unfortunate to have the old star ratings on there nonetheless, at least in the position they were in, because they still were pretty prominent, I would say. So I would really strongly urge and hope that next year that's not the case. And that's all I got. Anybody gone? All right. Do you guys want to make any closing comments? That was excellent. It was very complicated, and I appreciate all the efforts to help bring us all up to speed on that.
No, I appreciate that, Ruth, and I appreciate with everyone having a really helpful and thoughtful conversation, and we always appreciate your input, and we look forward to continuing to update you on our progress and in the areas of accountability and assessment, and we'll be back when there's more to report. So thank you.
Hold on, one thing. Donna, remind them about the public comment period and when that ends one more time. And then they are able to submit public comment. We are required to do public comment. We need the public comment. We have to send the public comment, talk about the public comment.
Absolutely. Public comment is available. You can submit public comment through January 22nd. You will submit that public comment to DC School Report Card at dc.gov. That's an identified email address. It is the last slide on the slide deck that I used today. I will put that in the chat as well so that everyone has that. And we will then be including that public comment in our review prior to submission. And as Justin said, that public comment will also be available on our website. Is that correct, Justin? Is that how that is?
I believe we submit we have to submit it.
Okay.
And
so
Donna,
that
is that public comment on everything that you've talked about tonight, or just on some of what you've talked about? Because there are two different waivers. Am I right?
It is public comment on the addendum and waiver. those two items that are being submitted on February 1st. Public comment is available through January 22nd.
And will we be able to see any updates to the waiver due to public comment?
Yes, the waiver will be published on the OSSI website. It's also then published on the US Ed website once it's submitted. And once we receive approval or rejection from US Ed, that is also published.
How does the public know to make a comment?
Well, that's
I'm sorry, Fraser, did you say how does?
Yes. I mean, are you assuming that they all have computers and that they all are getting this information because everybody's watching us online, or because I know that one of the biggest problems that we
Top
have.
10 show, Fraser. You're really out of date.
Say again?
It's a top 10 show. Everybody's watching.
Yeah, okay, whatever. And I just know that one of the biggest problems we've had is lack of access for a lot of families. And how can they make a comment if they don't know they can make a comment?
So we have utilized our channels for communication with families and stakeholders. Granted, it is digital. So we have communicated that through all of the channels that we typically do. We have put that out through social media. We've put it in information out to all of our LEAs and our schools and asked them to share that with their parents and families. PCSB has put it in their family newsletter as well as putting it out in their school newsletter. We've put it in our LEA Look Forward.
We've had council staff retweet and you are more than welcome as an elected official to use your social media and to promote the public comment. Public comments in the District of Columbia on regulatory matters are generally digital as well. And we just want to make sure that we gave you that opportunity so we have to be able to demonstrate that we took public comment and that we did it and we won it. That was the point.
I noticed that on the buses there are all kinds of ads for different schools and different things like that. I would just make the request that you put something on the buses.
So Fraser, I can talk to at least to the bus part. Is that the ombudsman and the student advocate have done advertising both in Metro on the bus, and it takes up to 90 days in order to get the ads ready to go on the buses. It isn't a fast process whatsoever. So for 30-day public comments, it really isn't possible to do that.
Okay. I just don't, I know that there are a lot of parents, it's when the robocalls are sent to parents from schools, a lot of times they never get it, or when students are given information to take home to their parents, it somehow never makes it to their parents.
Can I just make a suggestion, Fraser? I think that's such an important point. And what I have found most effective in these kinds of situations is to ask school leaders or PTO presidents to disseminate the information to their school community, because that's a trusted source. And also then the language access piece, they tend to do that as well if it's not already accessible or already provided. So I think that's something that we can do, is make sure that our schools and our wards know about this. And it's not, but I'm really glad that you raised that, because, you put it in your newsletter and those 30 people see it, and if that, right? So no, it's really important point.
Quick follow-up on these. One, so Justin, are you saying that there's no way that people can submit comments except electronically? Or
We
just
accept mail at the OSSI offices, like all government agencies also accept mail at our offices. 1050 First Street Northeast, 3rd floor.
That's fine. So that could just be part of the communication, that you can either go online or do it by mail. And then, so John Paul, can we put this on we'll put this on our social media?
Yep, we already have a couple times, and we'll certainly do it again. It was also, all the information was also part of the press release related to this working session, including how to do the public comment. And we've been trying to make sure that that's happening in concert with OSSI's work on this issue as well. But I'm happy to also work with OSSI and put together a little blurb for members to send out to their school communities, or we can do that at the board level too. It's we're happy to do that.
And then last on that was, I forget. Okay.
Great.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great
Thanks,
evening.
friends.
Okay. All right. So the next thing up is this document around questions for the proposed new superintendent. And oh, sorry, I thought I went totally dark there. And let me, so this is a, we're not part of that process. The presumption is that there will be a nominee made through the mayoral channels, and it will go to the council, and that there likely will be some council hearing on this. And again, none of this is sort of in our purview per se. And I'm not even positive how much of that is true. And John Paul, I don't know if you have any new information to add to that, but that's sort of our understanding. And so what we figured was kind of the best way to have some impact on this was to be able to send over to the council questions that we hope they might ask of candidates. And I would go beyond that as well, which is, priorities, what we most care about, what really needs to be happening that in a way that maybe is not now. So what you've got there is a set of questions that I think grew out of our December meeting, comparable discussion. But we wanted to keep it open because obviously you all are new and you weren't there in December. And so the question is, are there other questions? Are there comments? Are there recommendations? And then, I think the idea, John Paul, would be to put this together as some mix of the questions and the priorities and send it over as a document from us, from the board.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's because there is no Committee on Education, it would then go to Councilmember Mendelson as chair of the Committee of the Whole for his consideration in whether or not he wants to ask these questions, or the alternative is also to send it to members of the council writ large and say, these are the things that we think are important to ask about. And we hope that some of these questions will be answered. And I think either one and both are probably fine. But I do want to note as well that we did get, Dr. Reed did send in for additional questions. So those have been added to the ones that were originally from the working session. But if there's other things that folks want to talk about now, we're certainly happy to add that.
So let me just to sort of kick it off and then everybody can get in is, I would love to see something, and there may be people here that can speak more to it, is to, that meow is my cat. One of our cats is, and actually Alistair may be able to talk about this in the case of Mississippi. There are states that do a whole lot more around reading and literacy than we do, that have sort of put into place a set of guidelines, professional development, so on around reading. And so one question I have is, does somebody know about that? And possibly to make that even a recommendation, then what would actually the recommendation be? So that's the kind of thing I'm interested in sort of putting in, but let me now throw it open to others about. And I don't think we want, people can have other opinions. I don't think we want just a long laundry list. So part of what we should be thinking about is what matters most. But other people may think it should be long. So. Any other takers?
Both Ebony and Jessica have their hands up.
Why am I not seeing that? Okay, sorry guys. Who went first? Who came first?
Please let Ebony Rose go first,
Yes,
since she's got to leave.
I'm going to leave. And I'm going to hope to rejoin, mostly because I'm the owner of the other meeting and I need to at least start it. And then pray to the Zoom gods that I can transfer the hosting privileges, because that has not been figured out. So I heard John Paul say that it makes sense to send it to Councilmember Mendelson. I second it. I also think it makes sense to send it to all the members since there's no education committee. I think when it's sent, it would make sense to ask if there are staff, there are education staff that we can meet with to discuss why these things or any things that are particularly important. Because not just because there are new council members, but because as you all know, the council members are responsible for oversight of so many different areas that affect residents' lives. And I'm sure they would benefit from, I've heard from some council members that they would benefit from any advice or consultation with the board. So I think it makes sense for us to go ahead and offer to see if anyone would like to meet with us to start some of those conversations and for them to ask any questions they have so they can be better informed when they do participate in the confirmation process.
Jessica, I'll echo Ebony Rose's good suggestion of sending it to all the members and making ourselves available to speak with their education staff about our questions. One other thing I want to note is I hope that we keep the questions high level enough that we recognize that a new state superintendent likely has priorities, but also will likely wait until they meet with their staff before shaping the details of their priorities. So on the reading piece, like I absolutely think we need to talk about the importance of literacy in one of our questions and asking about their experience with or their top issues. But I also would hope that we would have opportunities to meet with the new state superintendent once they are confirmed to talk about data and issues that we have seen and heard from constituents. So that's just my advice is I want to make sure we don't, to the point you made, Ruth, have a laundry list of fine-grained, predetermined, what do you think about X, but make sure that we keep them at a level that we learn about what they really care about, what their experience and expertise is, and what they have convinced the mayor should be the top priorities for the district that has led her to nominate them.
Zach and then Carlene.
Yeah, I would echo the keeping the questions high level and just a structural recommendation. If instead of just a laundry list of questions, if we could pull up like themes and have questions under those themes. So for instance, I'm seeing several connected to early childhood. I'm seeing several connected to special education. I think those buckets might help council orient around certain things, even if they don't ask our specific questions, they can think to ask about certain topics. And I would just underscore, I think these are all very great questions. I would just underscore the one around, and it may be mine, around systematic support of schools. And I heard some members getting at that tonight. I would just really want an incoming superintendent to really lay out a vision for how do you support schools, hold schools accountable, obviously, to the state metrics, but how do we create a vision for support?
That's my turn.
Carlene.
Go ahead.
You.
Okay, I didn't want to be recognized. So I do, I feel like these questions should basically kind of mirror what DC's though education needs and our state education agency formally. So, not making sure these are not just general education questions that we would want, any state to ask, but what's specific to DC in regards to our unique educational framework and what's under the purview of OSSI. So OSSI has transportation, early childhood, the post-secondary, of course, K through 12, and then some of the health and wellness. So making sure that, and kind of what Representative Thompson was mentioning, yeah, we want to guide council of not just picking a wonderful leader, but a leader who can really pick up the ball about, where DC has been brought in education and kind of forward it so that they can hopefully confirm someone who is not just, a general expert in education, but someone who has expertise in where DC needs to go. And I think that's what we want to target in our list of questions.
So can I think I'm next anyway. So but I want to ask you, Carlene, I mean, that's sort of what I'm trying to get at in terms of these priorities. And I wonder if you could talk out a little bit what that might look like. In other words, we are DC. What is the special priority that we see, the context that we see in DC that we want someone to focus on in this role?
Yeah, I don't want to pick on anyone's questions, but like the first one about student voice and decision-making and parents and educators, I hope any highly skilled individual who is being interviewed by the mayor would have a strong plan for that. And maybe there are some nuances with DC, but I would love to hear them talk about the strengths and challenges of our education system, because DC is, again, very unique in how we fund our system and how our system is constructed. So I think that is something I would be interested in hearing. The approach to school accountability moving forward under the new Biden administration is going to be a tough one, similar to what we just heard from with Shana Young mentioning about we've heard hints of what the Biden administration is interested in doing, but until Essa is revamped and until the administration actually lays out its priorities in a formal measure, they'll be blowing smoke. To be honest, how do you view the state agency around teaching and learning? That one could be into a bucket around the supports that Representative Parker was mentioning. Similar for the one underneath it. I think we're all interested in COVID-19. Post-secondary.
Let me ask you this. Take something like special ed, right? So would you want to, and I gather you may put a question in here, which I'm not seeing, but take special ed. Is there a way that you would pose it that's very DC specific in terms of here's a situation we face and we're eager to know how you would deal with X? And I don't mean X in a super fine grained way, but some kind of X, some kind of specific, or is that not what you're proposing?
I think that would to that question, then I think one, probably taking the testimonies that we've already received from parents, especially in special education, and families and people who've interviewed or who testified previously. But I mean, again, what are the concepts that are unique to DC special education framework? And I can't lay them all out, but like one thing I would love to see is our early childhood system rolled into special education more robustly. It's currently a gap that we don't really need to get into more specifics to hold up time, but those would be some things that are unique. And then I've heard, probably listening to testimonies of other people, what are our post-secondary options for individuals with special needs? And then how is that unique to DC? And I'm probably missing all the stuff that's in the middle, but I don't want someone to come in and give us the usual buzzwords that will get people excited around special education or any topic, but really, refine it for DC. And that might be kind of what Representative Thompson was talking about, and we need to maybe just kind of sit down and hash out what the specific things that we would love to pass on to council to say, here is an individual who might just give you high level things around special education, around topics. And here's an individual who has really done their research about the current status of DC and can possibly move us forward.
I think it went Zach, Jacques, Alistair, and if I totally screwed that up and it matters, someone tell me.
I've already gone.
Oh, okay. Well, your hand is still up. Okay.
My hand's up, Ruth.
Okay. Okay, John Paul, can you take this over? I'm missing up. I'm mixing.
Sure. Fraser, go ahead.
Yes, I have a question about the process. Are we going to be asking these questions to someone who's already been chosen?
So we are not asking these questions of anybody.
Right. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
Is the person that's going to be...
It would be during a nomination hearing.
But is the nomination hearing for one or for more than one nominee?
No, it's one person.
So that and that's chosen by the mayor, right?
Correct.
So the person that we're going to be asking these questions to is someone that's already been chosen. Because I think the reason I'm saying that is I think that we need to tailor our questions, since it is a person that's already been chosen, we need to tailor our questions to that person. An example is, let's suppose, just for the sake of argument, that the person who's chosen is someone who's already in the district system. The questions would be different than someone coming from, as Farabee did, from Cincinnati. So I think that we need to think about, with this great group of questions, what we should do to winnow those kinds of questions that might not be necessarily the kinds of questions we'd ask of a person who's either from this area or not from this area. We don't want to be just general questions that they can answer without doing anything.
I think that's fair. I think there is also the concept of asking questions for the record. So even if you know the answer to a question, it's sometimes important to get someone to say it on the record to be able to be very clear about that. So that's one other thing about even asking the questions that we think everyone should know. But to Dr. Reed's point, they should know what they're going to talk about on student voice, right? Like any candidate from DC or from whatever should have something to say there. And we want to know what that is. And so I think there's two types of things there. One hesitation that I have about potentially waiting too long into this is then it would eliminate the ability for us to actually do those follow-up meetings, as Ebony Rose talked about, with meeting with our council members to talk about why we think these are important, because the potential is that the nomination will come, and likely within a month, the nomination hearing will also occur, and then a vote. And so we have a very limited window in order to be able to have that type of conversation. And a lot of these subjects are pretty complicated. And for some council members who haven't really dealt with education because they weren't on the Committee of Education previously, they may need a little bit more time to get up to speed on these issues. So I see your point. And I think we could also then follow up with particular questions once we know who the nominee is.
Right, good. Thank you.
Sure. Alistair?
Thanks. Yeah. I think thinking about the purpose, right, of this, then what I see in these questions, we're trying to understand how the candidate or the nominee understands, to what extent do they understand the DC context is something I've heard, right, from this conversation so far. What their vision is, what their knowledge of specific topics that are important to us is. But in addition to that, I think I would like to know more in a few broader other categories, right? Like how do they build consensus, and how do they build coalitions, right? And maybe there are a few other kind of key broader strokes of criteria that we would like to see, rather than more, instead of adding more topics of expertise. Although I find that to me is the one where they can lean on people almost the easiest, actually, right? In terms of technical expertise. And then one thing I see missing in these questions as well is room to talk about past experiences and failures and learnings. I think instead of asking questions in this form of, what are your thoughts about DC's, instead of asking something like, what is your approach to, I would be curious, actually, I think it's perhaps more interesting to ask, what have your approaches been, right, to, and really specify sort of what challenges that nominee has overcome already in addressing something like this, and how they actually went about doing that, rather than, I think if we ask it in a way of that's a little bit more hypothetical, it's just words.
Great.
Thank you. Jacques?
Thank you. John Paul, you kind of alluded to it, but do we have a time frame in which we are expecting a nomination? You just referred to it maybe within a month, and then we'd have another month before they would be before the council. Is that something that has some type of understanding, or something that you've heard?
I have not heard any particular gossip amongst the nomination folks either at EOM or the council on when a nominee would happen. My assumption is that once a nominee comes, the mayor will want to have someone in place prior to performance oversight and budget hearings. And since those start at the end of March, it's my assumption that there will be some quick moving in the next couple weeks and months in order to get this in order to get a nominee done.
So my follow-up question would be, when would you like us to start meeting with potentially council members that we've talked about once we formulate these questions?
As soon as I get a final list of questions, I would love for you to start meeting. However, at any time, certainly new board members will know this from the board members who have been here for a bit. You should meet with your council members as much as they possibly will take a meeting with you, because you are in concert with them, the representatives of the people, and so you should be talking with them regularly. And I'm happy to be there if you want a staff person to bring the data and the details type things. I'm happy to do those types of things for you as well. Just keep me posted. But specifically on this, as soon as the questions go over, my hope would be that you would be able to then schedule a meeting within a week or two after that, either with the member or with their education staff person.
Good. Thank you.
Sure. Ruth.
Is there anyone else? My last. One way to maybe incorporate a couple of different ideas that have been put out there is, can we move forward, as you just described, John Paul, to get questions out to people, and so that people are in some position to start talking to their council members about this, perhaps along with other things, and then be in a position around 2 or 3 or 4 of these issue buckets. As soon as there is a nominee, try to develop some background on that maybe is specific to the nominee, so that we're then in a position to raise more contextual questions. And maybe the timing won't work, and maybe the timing would work, but the idea would be, we've identified a set of buckets. The staff knows that once we get a name, let's try to find something out, through NASB, through people in those states. And that could be almost more like, talking points for us, maybe, as opposed to necessarily something that would go out more broadly. Any thoughts on that, folks? Alistair?
Zooming out one more time, I just want to make sure I understand what our role is in all of this, right? So a confirmation hearing, what does that mean? What power do we actually have there? Or is it more of a, okay, so it's
about
really
raising issues. Yeah.
Okay.
It's about raising issues. It's just like everything we do.
So what I hear you saying then is, there is a role of making sure that the constituents who voted for us and who voted for our council members are heard, right? And so reaching out, is part of it reaching out to them to say, this process is happening. What are some of the most important factors and considerations to you for the new superintendent hire? And then channeling that through us to make sure that as part of this consideration that's considered, or is that what you were saying?
Me? Mm-hmm. No, not so much. What I'm saying something a little different, which is state education agencies do pretty technical stuff. So it's not that I would necessarily go out to constituents and say, what should the state agency do? I mean, I might. I'm not saying I wouldn't, but I also think part of our value add is that we know something about the agencies and what they do and the issues. And so it's to sort of make a meld between the kinds of issues that are out there, what we know about what agencies can do, and then potentially connect that to individuals so that we can, as people said earlier, to be able to raise it with our council members so that they can raise it in the course of their own questioning. Because I think a lot of them will probably sit down with the nominee. That I think is typical. Somebody tell me if they think that's wrong. And to your first question, Alistair, why are we doing this? What can we do? I think it's really to be able to, it's one more way to be able to raise the valence of certain issues if council members are raising it with a new education superintendent, I think that's meaningful. That's what I.
Okay, if that's the case, right? Is there, what do folks feel about? Is this the place where is there room to be more aggressive then, right? To be saying, what are the things that we want that nominee to say on record? Does it have things to do with, firing and hiring principals? Will you on record say that you won't fire a principal without da 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 da, right? Are those the kinds of things then that we want to have put on record? Because actually then I take back what I was saying before about asking about past experiences, because we're not vetting, right? We're not confirming, we're not checking their qualifications. If the goal of these questions is really to, as Emily wrote, get them to say things on record so we can hold them accountable, I think that would change for me what kinds of questions we're asking.
Yes, I think that I agree with where you're going. I mean, I think that's right. And I'm looking for Emily's question, but yeah, I do think that's part of it. Jessica?
So I think there's room to be more aggressive. I think there's two things we have to consider. We have no formal authority in this process, and I think we're trying to create one for ourselves. And I think our path forward is through the council. So I think we should also, we have to think just politics wise, how do we make ourselves of most use to the council in this process? And I think the way we do that is to say, with no education committee, the value add we give is we've pre-vetted the issues that are specific to the OSCE that we have heard from constituents that we think should come through in this hearing. I think that's how I plan to frame it to Councilmember Allen. And I think, you all know your council members and can decide how to frame it appropriately, but I think that's the value that I can sell and he will buy. I think the second thing is just making sure we're all clear to Dr. Reed's point on what the OSCE does. So like so many things in the city, our system is so complicated that, like, for instance, OSCE doesn't get to deal with principals. They don't have any authority over it. Even in licensure, I don't think they even deal with administrator licensure. I know they deal with teacher licensure, but I don't think they do administrator licensure. So just making sure that because I like your point a lot, Alistair, just making sure that we pick a couple things that we would want to get aggressive on. I know folks on this board care a lot about accountability. So those questions I think should feature prominently. I know folks on this board care a lot about high school graduation requirements. And I think we'd want to make sure that features, as well as special ed. So that would be my second piece of advice, is that we should decide what we want to get aggressive on and be specific to what we've heard from folks that OSCE can do and has not done on those issues we care about.
If we were, John Paul, you were saying there may be a window of a month. So we wouldn't be talking about this probably, I mean, somebody could be chosen before we talk about it. So we really need to, maybe at the retreat, which is only 3 weeks away, we can't do that, just talk about it?
No, because it would be a policy discussion and that's not permittable.
Okay. Thank you for letting everybody know that. And me.
If I could just add, I agree with the purpose and the framing. I just want to throw out there that not all of the council members are experts on education. I also think that is a direct value of us weighing in, that we can provide a lift there. And so to that, I'm not confident that just passing along a list of questions will actually be that beneficial. And so can we synthesize and then draft a preamble, perhaps of sorts, to say why this question is important? How does it connect to our context, to kind of give some framing to council members? Because if they were to ask these questions, do they even know what to listen out for? What's a good answer versus a bad one, et cetera?
To follow up from that, I mean, John Paul, I mean, this would fall on the staff to do this, but if we identify just 3 or 4 buckets, I mean, does it make sense to have the staff just try to write up for each of them a couple of paragraphs that sort of sets the context, explain why it's important, and says what we care about. It's not just a question. It's sort of what, to go back to literacy. I mean, I just keep thinking about this, is the kinds of things that state agencies do around literacy that we think are really important. Now, we're not going to micromanage, do this professional development program 5 days a week. But the idea that council members could raise with a nominee that this is the kind of thing we would like our state agency to really get into in a big way, and do that for 3-4 issues, and maybe contextualize it to the person.
I like that idea, Ruth, a lot. I would just throw out that maybe we as board members should take a stab at drafting. They can put it together and make it look nice. But I think our perspectives on the issues may even, no offense to the staff, but our perspectives on the issues may be a bit more nuanced. And I'm sure.
Well, I think both. I mean, look, I think both. I think at this point, the staff has done a lot around special ed. We've heard a lot. We've had a lot of meetings around special ed. I would think the staff could come up with some draft ideas around special ed. And I would think likewise, maybe on, maybe that's one that strikes me as one that we've just done a lot about. Another would be around reading, or people could, we could take volunteers, to, but I'm worried about putting it all on board members. People are getting up to speed. They're, I'm, insofar as the staff can write drafts that we can then work with, I think that's a better way to do it. It may not always be possible. So I think if there's individuals that have specific ideas about how they would frame something, I'm all for volunteers. Does that sound right, John Paul?
I mean, if the board members want to take the first stab, staff is certainly happy to let them do that. But we also can do the same thing if by the end of this conversation we have a set of what the buckets would be. I'm assuming there would be some things like accountability, early childhood, what are literacy, maybe special education. But I think we need to make sure too, to Ruth's point earlier and to Jessica's point, to make sure that we're focused on which things we think are the most important to ask, because then we will be more likely to get some information. But
and again, I want to be clear. To me, it's not just what are the questions to ask. It's what are we looking for?
Right. No, right. I'm just saying, what are the 4 issues or 5? I don't think we can do 15.
Right. I agree. And I would be more helpful, except for I have now lost my initial list of questions, but I would just say what I hear, very much special ed. And I think we have a baseline. We've heard a lot about that. So I think there's a consensus about that, what that would look like. I kind of feel that way on literacy, but that might just be what's in my mind.
I'm definitely going to talk to Councilmember Pinto about, making sure, trying to convince her to get the nominee to commit to something around, making sure that we improve the ways that teachers learn how to teach how to read, right? But I think, I guess the question would be if each of us is responsible to talking to our own council members, and we all have a sense of what the other folks are asking, right? I think that's the best way that we kind of shift this as a block. If Ruth, you and I are going to talk to our council members for sure about the literacy piece, would love everyone else's support in making sure that the other council members are also aware that, states like Mississippi have implemented, things that have been relatively quite successful. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, and there's a lot of, whether it's causal and whether there's other pieces for sure, right? Can be discussed at length. But I would be curious then, as part of this list, to hear what are some other things then that other board members would recommend, that basically it's what are other things that I should be talking with Councilmember Pinto about, right?
All right, so this is very good, and we need to move forward both. So what's now formulating for me, and this was very, very helpful, is that really what we want, I think, maybe, is a set of talking points that are,
Yeah.
that we can all use. We'll all build on them. We may all also have some different ones, but some really good talking points, 4 or 5 of them, or on 4 or 5 topics that, you know, both give our priority, explain why, maybe ask for some very particular things, such as Alistair right there is talking about, sort of real serious professional development around reading, that's really what we're after. And what I would suggest is that we ask the staff to, we do 2 things simultaneously. Insofar as there are people on the board who in the next, you know, by the end of the week or the end of the weekend, John Paul, you tell me if this is right, by the end of the weekend, can put together their talking point. And by talking point, I mean, it can be a paragraph, it can be 2 paragraphs. It's not a page and it's not a sentence, somewhere in between. And if we have them, send them to John Paul, let's match them up with the list. And then between that and the staff, we'll try to put together a set of them and get them out maybe by the end of next week for people to look at. We can add to them, subtract to them, massage them. And they may not work absolutely the same way for every single person. We can see where we're at and we'll either use them individually or we'll pass them on in some way. Does that sound like I'm seeing good facial expressions. So I think, okay, I think that's a plan. All right. Okay. And we have a timeline on it. So that's a plus. All right. The next piece is, and it's late, and I'm wondering, what we wanted to do was to let, you know, we're going to move into elections at the meeting. We're going to have a retreat. We're going to talk about issues. We're going to develop priorities. And what we had planned to do tonight was to ask each of the committees to say a little bit about what they had been doing, so that this was, you know, what they have been doing, what their hopes were, what they might be planning as their priorities in their mind going forward, although we're all going to revisit all of this. To do that tonight so that we're sort of bringing that into the retreat. What I'm also concerned about now, though, is it is a little late. And I wonder, this is really a question to John Paul, is that something that we can start our retreat with, just sort of essentially reports on what these committees have been working on, sort of how they see things as we move into a priority discussion?
I think yes, because as long as there's not discussion around the policies or what we might do. And for new members, the reason for this is to make sure that we are in compliance with the Open Meetings Act, because we are not allowed under open meetings to discuss policy issues where at a point where the public can't see us doing it. And so to me, it would fall under the exception of professional development for members. So for the new members, to make sure that they are fully up to speed on where we are, I think reports from the chairs or former chairs of these committees would be acceptable. But again, we wouldn't be able to really go into details about discussion of what would be next or anything like that.
All right. Does that sound workable? I'm Jessica, is that a yes or a not sure? Or?
Can I make one comment that I'd hoped to share on this because it's time sensitive?
Yes.
So I chaired the Social Studies Standards Committee and happy to talk all about that during the retreat. But OSSE is recruiting writers for the standards right now. And there are 2 things I wanted to make sure all the members knew about. One is that application is open until January 15th. So it's only open until next Friday. I have shared it on my Twitter today. I am also happy to forward an email that I sent out a blast to my mailing list. But please share this with your constituents, retweet it or share it, however, because we want to make sure that we have representation from all the LEAs in the city on this writing committee. We have 67 LEAs, and we're trying to get as many as possible represented by their teachers, curriculum writers. They're also recruiting community members. So that deadline is January 15th. I'll put the link in the chat. The second thing, and this is mostly for folks who've been on the board, just as a fun update, OSSE found money to pay the writers a stipend of $2,000.
Oh.
So these standards writers who previously were expected to volunteer up to 400 hours of their time, 200 hours of their time, what did they land on? 200 hours of their time over the course of a year?
Either way, they need a union.
Yes, are now going to be compensated. And this was something that we asked OSSI about and pushed really hard on, and they came through on it. So I just wanted to share those two things.
Perfect.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so that's the new plan. So that leaves us, so we're going to give anybody an opportunity who's interested in running for one of our offices, president or vice president, to talk, say something, explain to us why. And then I also know there's stuff under new business, but so let's start with that. So starting with president.
Well, colleagues, I will jump in and start, and I'm humble and excited to express interest in serving as the board's president. I prepared remarks, but I'm going to try and keep this short. So I'm just going to hit high-level notes. A little bit about me. I am an educator, entering my 12th year in the field. I started as a 7th grade math teacher in New Orleans, and since have had the opportunity to work with school leaders and educators across the country working towards equitable instruction. And I share that because that informs my approach to this work as the Ward 5 representative, and my vision for I hope the board can go in the year ahead. Undoubtedly, my vision is shaped by those who came before me, my Ward 5 predecessor, Mark Jones, who helped shape the idea for the State Board of Education during its inception. Our former Ward 7 colleague, Karen Williams, who helped build the staff and the budget. I often say the State Board is the house that Karen built. And Ruth Wattenberg, who has led the State Board through various processes, but most notably through drafting, reviewing, and introducing a bill to the council for the first time. I think given where DC is, the challenges facing our schools, and where our outcomes are for students of color, Black, brown students, special needs, low-income students, et cetera, and informed by my work on the board for these past 2 years, I would say my vision centers on 3 broad themes. First is around deepening the board's focus on equity through the formal implementation of the board's equity framework. And for the new members, we will have an opportunity to engage and learn more about the framework at our upcoming retreat, as well as in the months ahead. Secondly is to strengthen board processes and increase collaboration, not through just words, but through distributed leadership and intentional moves that would help foster that collaboration. And thirdly, expanding our reach in throughout DC and in our wards, pushing for greater board authority as well. And so I believe that the work that I've done on this board in my community represents those 3 themes, whether it was introducing and working with the board to unanimously pass that equity framework, collaborating with colleagues to pass resolutions like the one where we unanimously passed, focused on special education expectations for the board, or my work in Ward 5, engaging neighbors through a high school tour that Representative Patterson, then just Jock, was able to attend, as well as Representative Wattenberg, what we heard from students firsthand about their experiences, and a host of other things. What I've heard from you, which is very important, and I've tried to kind of bucket these in 4 large categories of things that the board, I believe, is interested in. First, instructional and operational recovery following COVID-19, including the development of a statewide literacy plan. And we've heard a little bit about that tonight. Secondly, deepening our engagement with our communities and with those on the front lines, our parents, our educators, and our students. And by deepening our engagement, making the state board, bringing the state board to the public, and ensuring that we're hearing from a representative sample of the public, not just those that are regular actors in our education landscape. Thirdly, focusing on the educational experiences with students with special needs. And lastly, facing the tough discussions around mayoral control, school oversight, and public engagement. I know there was a lot of great work started last year, and I believe there's a commitment, and I'm committed to ensuring that we complete that work, including research around teacher retention, making recommendations for improving the STAR framework, as well as updating the district social studies standards. And I'll just close by this by saying, I think what happened yesterday for our country, for our city, was ever the more of a reminder why we as a state board do the work that we do. And this work for me, as I'm sure it is for you, is very real. Too many of our students, namely Black, Brown, and low-income students in this city, attend schools that are underfunded, undersupported, and I think set up to fail. And that's why I was also interested in those questions around how are we supporting our schools to achieve the outcomes that we want them to achieve. And so I hope that my bid for president of the state board will help advance the board, not just in process, but also hopefully disrupting some of the systems that have been ironclad for too many of our students and communities. So I will stop there. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back over to Madam President.
Thank you very much. Anybody else for president? Okay, Vice President? Emily?
I'd like to speak. Thank you, Madam President. So this is a very exciting moment for me. I am really thrilled to have this opportunity to share my interest in teaming up with Representative Parker to serve as the State Board of Education's next Vice President. I too am an educator. In fact, I'm a lifelong educator. I've spent my entire adult life in this profession. This is my 25th year in the field. I started as an elementary school teacher and taught for 9 years in the classroom. And like Representative Parker, I have coached teachers and consulted in DC schools across sectors and across wards for many years. I also, and this is maybe my most important role, is that I'm a parent of a third grader that most of you either know or have at least seen, and we'll probably see at the end of this meeting. And all of those roles have really influenced my priorities on the board, as well as how I came to be here in the first place. In fact, it was as a concerned parent and educator that I had my first encounter with the State Board of Education. I believe it was back in 2016, but it was on the other side of the dais as a public witness with concerns about OSSE's proposed school accountability plan. There were over 100 witnesses in all when everything was said and done, and many of them were educators and parents, almost entirely critical of the plan. And as we know, the state board passed that plan, but with a list of recommendations based on public input, and almost none of those recommendations were taken up by OSSE. I found that experience deeply disillusioning at the time, and I wrote about it. And the gist of it was, how can an accountability plan be passed without accountability to those who would be most impacted by it? And it was at that point, admittedly with some cajoling from neighbors and friends, that I saw an opportunity to address what I understand now is a chronic problem in our system of disregarding stakeholder input. And, you know, fast forwarding to the present, I'm really proud of the essential work we are currently doing to ensure that our statewide accountability system evolves to reflect as accurately and fully as possible the quality of our schools. I look forward to rolling up our sleeves in the coming months as we continue to collect input from new members and the public and move toward making recommendations for meaningful improvements to the STAR framework that address the embedded biases our research has identified and that help us to shift from an emphasis on ranking schools to a focus on identifying needs and providing support. So a desire to improve our school evaluation system is one issue that motivated me to serve on the board. Another is my deep investment in democracy. And something I should mention is that 7 of my 9 years in the classroom were in a democratically governed school, which meant that I was part of a very collaborative group of teachers who really found ways to provide the whole school community with forums to speak out, to be part of the community. So it's very much in my professional blood to do this. And I believe that the voices of those who are most impacted by decisions must have a place at the decision-making table. From helping to establish an active Ward 1 Education Council with the goal of creating channels of communication and networks of support between Ward 1 schools, to working closely with the teachers and students in my ward, which for those of you who don't know, Ward 1 has the largest population of Spanish-speaking family students and teachers. So I worked with them to draft the Latinx teacher recruitment and retention resolution and successfully advocated on the state board to make sure that we have language access for Spanish-speaking constituents. I have consistently used my position on the state board to empower and engage stakeholders. What I have come to realize, though, over my 2 years on the board is that it is not enough to simply amplify stakeholder voices. We must be empowered as representatives to bring those voices to decision-making. As we have learned over and over the hard way, the best intentioned plans and solutions fall short when we fail to draw on the expertise of those who have firsthand knowledge of the reality on the ground inside our schools. The pandemic has emphasized the degree to which essential stakeholder input has been ignored by system leaders, most dramatically highlighted by reopening attempts that have completely blindsided those charged with carrying out that reopening plan. The Well-Rounded Education webinar series that Representative Parker and I recently launched is one example of how we have leveraged the state board's platform to authentically engage and learn from stakeholder expertise during the pandemic. So ultimately, it is our task to better serve district students during the current crisis and beyond. But we really can only truly be responsive to our constituents if we have more influence over system level decision-making. That is the goal. How we achieve that will be shaped by all of us. I know I speak for Representative Parker and myself when I say that while we are prepared to serve as president and vice president, we believe in a distributed leadership model, one in which collaboration, communication, and collegiality are highly prized, even when, or I guess I should say, especially when we don't all agree. And this is it's an incredibly exciting time to be on the State Board of Education. As Representative Parker noted, our agency has evolved enormously over the years, thanks to the guidance of leaders past and present. And over the past 2 years in particular, President Wattenberg and Vice President Batchelor have positioned us through more active engagement with our constituents and with experts to be more influential, and also, of course, just echoing what Representative Parker said about, introducing our first legislation and really taking on the topics that our constituents have brought to us. We are poised to be a much more influential partner in our education ecosystem. So I will just conclude by saying, even, just being here with all of you tonight, what an amazing group. And I echo what President Wattenberg said at the beginning of the meeting. This is just a really star-studded State Board of Education. And we really bring such a deep well of professional experience, knowledge, and wisdom to the work to come. Cumulatively, these are some fun facts for you. We bring over 70 years of classroom teaching experience. Yeah, thanks, Fraser. But, he only has 47, I believe, so you can do the math. Parenting experience across the age spectrum, multiple advanced degrees, an unknown number of years of education policy experience, and of course, a rich student perspective. So I'm really thrilled at how active as well all of our new members are. I think it's amazing. I was realizing I have actually already worked with all of you before you were sworn in on various projects. And I know that you will work hard to bring the concerns from your respective wards to inform our priorities. Together, Representative Parker and I will work hard to expand the State Board of Education's networks and to create more effective channels of communication that, aligned with our new equity framework, reach our most vulnerable constituents who have been passed over by previous attempts at contact. After having conversations with each of you, I'm excited to get to work on your priorities, many of which Representative Parker outlined and which have been echoed in testimony we have heard from stakeholders and experts. And of course, I'm excited to work with Representative Parker, if you should choose both of us. We have not always had what I would call a productive working relationship. If you want to ask questions about it, you can. But we leaned into our differences when we agreed to co-chair the Well-Rounded Education Committee. And when our intended research was upended by COVID, together we devised a positive and creative solution. I would say that over the past year, we have grown to become a really dynamic team with complementary skills and priorities that we will bring to our work to raise the state board's visibility and influence. And that's all I've got. I look forward to any questions you might have.
Madam President, you're on mute.
Anybody else for Vice President? Anybody
Yes,
else?
I'd like to do that.
Okay.
I wanted to be able to say, Ruth, you're on mute, but
You got your chance, Frazier. You got your chance. And you all will get your chance.
I'd like to, I don't have a script necessarily. I just want to talk to you all for a couple of minutes about why I'd like to help President Parker as his vice president and what I think about leadership. I'm not going to talk a lot about what I've done on the board. On the 4th of January, I celebrated my 50th year as a DC educator. It's a couple of years past that 47 now. When I was a child, I was an athlete. I always wanted to be a baseball player. I played football and basketball. I was a catcher. I was a quarterback, and I was a point guard. What do those three positions have in common? They're the leaders of the team. I went in the Army. I went to Vietnam. When I came back from Vietnam, I went to OCS because some people had recommended that I become an officer. I got out of OCS and I started working as an officer in the Army. I left the Army in 1968, before most of you were born, and as a captain in the Army. I went back to college. I played baseball. I was the captain of the team. I started teaching in 1971, as I said, at Garnet-Patterson Junior High School. I taught there for 7 years. I was teacher of the year. I went to Cardozo High School right up the hill from Garnet-Patterson and started coaching there. The first year I was at Cardozo, I was the assistant football coach, the assistant girls basketball coach, the assistant boys basketball coach, and the head baseball coach. And I did that I didn't do football much longer, but I coached basketball and baseball, and I coached baseball all the way through my career at Cardozo until 2017. I started teaching at UDC in 1982, and I've been teaching there almost ever since as an adjunct in the English department. I started working with the Penn Faulkner Foundation I had to do with the formulation of a program called Writers in Schools, which allows students to come in, authors to come in to the classroom. The Penn Faulkner Foundation will provide the books for the students. They would be able to meet live authors. When I was in school, we never read a live author. We never read an author of color. All of my students from 1991 until I finished teaching were able to meet 2 or 3 live authors every year. And if you think about the living author, who's your favorite author, I'd be willing to bet that they might have met that author. I became a member of the board of Penn Faulkner. I was the secretary for a year. I was vice president for a couple of years, and I was elected president of the Penn Faulkner Foundation for 3 years. I'm also on the board of the Toni Morrison Society. I've been a member of the Toni Morrison Society since 1991, and I'm on the board for the last 5 years. I think so those are like resumes or whatever. I think what's important about what I've been able to do in the last 2 years on the board was my ability to establish relationships with everyone on the board and with all of the players in the city. The chancellor, the mayor, members of the city council, the members of OSSE. I think I have good relationships with all of those people. And I'd like to use my relationships to help us become a more powerful board. I think it's of utmost importance that we use the expertise on this board. And I'd like to just double down on what Emily said. I'm so excited about working with, everyone's a younger member. Some of you are younger than my oldest children, and some of you are younger than my youngest children, or not my youngest children, but my middle children. And I have 5 children. All of them, except for one, have all graduated from college. One of them is a doctor, a veterinarian. I hope that my wife and I hope that we wanted them to become successful adults. And that's how I feel about everyone on the board. I want this board to be the best board that the District of Columbia has ever had. When I do institutes for teachers, because I'm a consultant with the College Board, I'm also a reader of the AP Literature exam and a table leader at the AP Reading. When I do my workshops for teachers, for AP teachers, which I've been doing for over 20 years now, I always talk to them about teachers should be pushers. Now, most of you don't know a whole lot about what the word pusher means with an historical definition, but we're good pushers. Teachers are good pushers. And what I want us to be on this board are people who push this city to understand how important we can be as a board. And that's what I really want to do as the vice president of the board, to help President Parker and the members of the board to become known, to become renowned, and to become more active than we are right now. I've learned as a leader that the best way to be a leader is to surround yourself with people who know more about things than you do. And I am utterly convinced that the new members of the board and the veteran members of the board, those of us who came on 2 years ago, and President Wattenberg, know more about things than I do. And guess what? I know more about some things than you do. And I want to share my knowledge and my leadership. And I want us to just blow it away. I have 2 signs behind me. One of them you can't read because I don't think you can read it. It says, those who are afraid to ask for help usually wind up needing it. And that was my credo in my class. These are the signs that were in my classroom every day. Students were, they had to see them every day because they were there all the time. And they understood. And I really believe in that. There's no problem with asking for help. If I don't know something, then I know who to ask. And if I don't know something on this board, I'm looking at all of you on this screen, and I know who to ask for certain things. I'm going to finish with two things. My children gave me for my birthday, I was 76 years old on November 17th. And my children came over and cleaned out my basement into my backyard. And believe me, the backyard was filled with my basement. And I was going through some papers because I'm trying to get rid of everything that was in the multitude of tubs that they had. And I read something today and I couldn't believe it. It was testimony that I gave to the school board in 1996 about how poorly Cardozo was constructed and supported by the city. 1996, I testified in front of the Board of Education in DC. And I'm going to continue to testify. And the reason I want to be your vice president is right behind me on my left ear, my wife, Myra, who passed away 3 years ago and was an early childhood educator, a Head Start teacher. And she is the reason I do everything that I'm on the board, and she's the reason I do everything. It's what would Myra do? And so that's why I'd like to be your vice president. Thank you.
Thank you to all of our candidates. Now we can entertain questions here, but I also want to say that I know all the candidates would be more than happy to talk to people offline as well. So if there are, Alex?
I actually don't have any questions. Well, first of all, thanks, Zach, because it appears you're going to be our next president, and I'm excited to seeing that since I've known you. I guess I've known you since, what, 2019? So it's been a little bit. So I still remember back when we were in person on the dais, you sat to my left. So I'm definitely looking forward to having you as president. And I hope, we've had discussions about it, but I hope you do as much as you can to be engaged with the students in the Student Advisory Committee. And this invitation goes to any of you all. I guess I was going to talk about it during the groups, but the Student Advisory Committee has a meeting Monday. It would be great if you guys could come to that. If you all want to speak, let me know. But maybe if you have questions, you want to know where students are at on some things, that'd be a great place to start for Zachary and then Emily and Frazier as well. You guys both seem like great VP candidates. Both of you will make great vice presidents, I'm sure of it. And I'm looking forward to whoever the new leadership is. I know it's going to be great. I'm excited to work with this new board. And it's pretty refreshing to see new faces here with a bunch of new ideas. So I'm definitely looking forward to the next year.
Thanks, Alex. Anybody else?
How much time do we have? I guess we're at time now, right?
Well, I mean, we're loose on time, at least. Zach might change this, but I'm always loose on time if there are things that need to be said. So yeah, but keep in mind, we also we have a little bit of new business. I know, a resolution, some other things. So, but yeah.
I think I would appreciate if we could continue this conversation in terms of, I think one question that I would have as a new member is, first, what does this even mean, right? Is it a symbolic role, and therefore is it something that it's about, how this looks, right? Is it about how you two work together, and does that matter most? Is it about how you engage different parts of the city into kind of, is it about communications? What is the most important thing about these two leadership roles? And then Zach, if you're willing to say, like, what are the weaknesses that you need to fill? I think that would create room for the rest of us to have more conversations with our two illustrious candidates.
A great question, Alistair. I would say the leadership roles are important, quite important, and they do have statute responsibilities. So, for example, Ruth currently being the president, she presides over these meetings. She also represents the board officially. So when the board does have to go before council, the president and at times the vice president will go and officially represent the board. There are some budgetary decisions and things like that. I would say also the role of leadership has looked different depending on the year and depending on who's at the helm. And one of the reasons why I mentioned the distributed leadership is because I really want everyone to feel empowered to really advocate for their interests and also be in the forefront, if that makes sense. And there is more that we're going to discuss in the weeks ahead around changes that we didn't feel like it was necessary to talk about tonight. In terms of the vice president role, quite frankly, I think there is a lot of work that we as a board need to do to beef up that role, kind of like at the national level, how the role and the significance of the vice presidency has changed over years. Technically, the vice president oversees the admin committee. And I know there's not a lot of context for some of these things, but the admin committee is where a lot of the policies and procedures of the board are discussed, decided, and then it comes to the board. But that too is more, I don't want to say symbolic, but it does go hand in hand to the official representation of the board with the president. Last thing I would just say to your question around gaps that I have, this is something I'll name two things. One, I feel like a key strength of mine, both professionally, is I'm great at vision setting, goal setting. I'm great at, I think, inspiring collaboration at times and bringing people together. I really can use help at times with execution. So setting a vision, setting a goal, the execution, while I think I'm still strong there, that is an area where I would love support. And I think given this role and and secondly, I would just say, given this role, I think it's going to be important as the board moves forward, trying to gain greater authority, interface with different players, someone that will be able to stand by me and helping me do that, if that makes sense. So being able to sit before council and answering questions, being able to meet with key stakeholders and representing the board in a positive way, et cetera. And it looks like John Paul put the official statutes for the different roles in the chat. And I would just throw this out there for new members. You all have the authority to propose changes to the bylaws. And so if there is something you would like to officially see the roles in leadership do or engage or change, you have the authority to make those proposals and we can vote on it.
I don't know if either of the VPs want to say something. I want to say something also about the VP role, but does either of you want to say something?
I would just like to say that I am interested in being the vice president to support the president, but also to be the voice in the room with the president to be able to say, wait a minute, do you think that's the best idea? Maybe we should look at that again. And as you probably know, I'm the devil's advocate for everything anyway. And I think that's one of my strengths, being able to do that. I'm not afraid. I don't have the only constituency I have are the students and the parents and the professionals in the school buildings. Those are the only people I need to please. I don't have any political aspirations. I don't have anything all I got to do is make sure that when I go to sleep that I've done what I'm supposed to do. So I think that would be what I would be doing as the vice president. I'm not interested in a ceremonial role. I don't need it for a resume at all. When Zach mentioned the vice president's role, and I think that I hope he was talking about, maybe he was talking about Joe Biden when he was vice president, or I know he was talking about Kamala Harris when she's vice president, but I know he wasn't talking about what happened the last 4 years. Because if we had to vote on how many great things the vice president did, it would be a short vote.
I will just say that, I mean, I agree with Fraser. And in general, I think, you know, a good leadership dynamic is one where the two parties can use each other as a sounding board. And I will just say that Zach and I already have that relationship. And we've worked closely, as I mentioned, you know, on the Well-Rounded Education Committee, starting out, you know, not really, I would say, fully understanding each other's working style. And what I have come to really appreciate, I say that, and I think Ruth can attest to this because she's been in, oh, and Jessica as well, have been in these meetings, that Zach and I actually have really different strengths. And I would say, you know, I don't know, I think you're pretty good at executing things, Zach, and I think you move kind of quickly. And I would second Fraser's point that sometimes, you know, the best role that the VP will be able to play is to say, yeah, you know, look at this, what about this? And I think we already have that. We already have that dynamic. So, and I really value that. I will say one strength also that you have, Zach, is that, you know, again, something I learned through our differences is that you really take a stance of curiosity instead of getting defensive, right? When somebody challenges you on something or takes you to task for something. And I've learned that from you. And I feel like I've been able to do that as well now, in general. And I think it's a really important quality that I would bring to this role. And I would just say, you know, both of us, coincidentally, Zach and I have served on the admin committee. So we have that experience to bring, I have that experience to bring to this role. I would like to, as Zach pointed out, beef up that role and try to find ways, for instance, to create more of a real communication channel between staff and members, which we don't fully have now. We're moving more in that direction. And then what I would just say is that I work really hard in my ward with my constituents and with, you know, sort of, I've branched out now with the outdoor learning work all over the city. I too have really strong connections with my council member and other council members and the DME I've worked with around the outdoor learning as well. Just spoke with the chairman about it the other day. So I don't think that there's that much of a differential there between Fraser and I. So I'll just put that out there.
I just want to say one thing on this, having just been the president, work with the vice president. As we said at the last meeting of the year, Marcus applied for a new job, which I'm afraid he did not get. But the result of that was for a number of the months in the second term, he had a lot of other responsibilities in addition to, like, you know, other jobs and so on. I want to say everything. I mean, I do feel like we were able to move the board in a very substantial way. And that was only possible because there were two people doing it. And I want to say it is my own experience is, yes, it's absolutely important to have someone in the room who can object to things. That's important. Although I assure you, everybody objects to everything, whether they're in the room or not at the moment. It is really important to have someone that you're working with, that you're thinking with, that you're talking with, that you can share the task of thinking about what it is you want to do. And I just, it's an interesting point that people are saying the vice presidency should be beefed up, and I support that. But I want to be really clear about the huge amount that Marcus was responsible for, that Marcus took up. And part of what we also did, and I think it's relevant, is, if you're really trying to pass something or push something, there's a lot of conversations you need to have internally, and being able to sort of talk to different people is very important. Being able to reach out to different people in the political and advocacy community is very important. Being able to come back with the different ideas of different people and put them together is really important. And being able to sort of review the ideas. Yeah, and we said that we had to sort of finesse them. And so it's a lot. I'll just say the VP actually, in my experience, played a very big role. And we met regularly with the staff, and so just saying.
I think I've had my hand raised for a little time. I just
Oh,
want to.
I'm sorry. I'm not really good.
No time. No problem, Madam President.
That's why I'm now
no problem at all, Madam President. I just want to say, for the interest of time, that I'm looking forward to speaking with each of the nominees, self-nominees, going forward before we have to make this vote, actually. What I will say is that I'm very focused on at risk at this particular time, specifically because of COVID, and recovery, and specifically in marginalized communities where we know children are falling even farther behind. So what I will say is that I will be asking each one of you, Mr. President, as it's by acclamation, you probably will be present, Zachary.
Not yet, but okay.
Yeah. Congratulations. But what I'll be asking you, and I'll be asking the other two vice president nominees, is what's the intersection of policy and standards and regulations for the State Board of Education that can influence and create a better environment for the recovery? I think it's very important that, as has been stated, that we create the best environment that we can advocate for our families. To the council, I've heard both of the vice president nominees speak to their relationships, but that we create the best environment that we can make education a top priority as we go into the budgetary cycle. And so I'll be hearing what your kind of like your strategy, your thought process will be around that, because that starts very, very, very soon. As soon as the individuals are sworn in, so to speak, we're going to be looking at the budgetary cycle. So I look forward to talking to each one of you about at-risk funding and about recovery. Thank you.
Carlene, are you trying to talk? Okay. Okay. I'm seeing no other hands. You are all encouraged and open to talk with the candidates. You have 1 week, because unlike normal, we're going to be right back here in 6 days. So I do think we have a new business. I believe, Emily, it's a resolution on outdoor. Am I correct? Is the first thing up?
Correct. So I sent a draft of a resolution on last Friday, I believe. So hopefully you have had a chance to look at it. If not, it's in SIMBY, so you can look at it there. And thank you, Carlene, for your recommendation, which I did add. So Carlene recommended that I add something about that there are successful models and that are doing outside of school time programming, and that they're, moving towards partnership. I think it was something like that. I did write it down.
Oh, Emily, we knew that you were totally frozen the whole time.
Really?
We heard no. Yeah. Am I right? Did anyone else hear?
No,
none of us.
We all heard her, Ruth. I think it was just you.
Oh, I was frozen. Oh, well, okay. Well, so much for that.
I will repeat for you later, Ruth. So anyway, that said, well, I think that's a really important point anyway. First of all, I want to say, because part of what, for instance, the Oxen Run model that I'm part of this coalition for equitable outdoor education, as is Carlene, and Alistair and maybe Jacques, I don't know, we'll see. But one of the things that we're trying to do is to create these positive models to show what is possible, right? While also answering some of the questions that have come up around this. And one of them has been, well, what about schools that don't have space? What about children who go to school in neighborhoods where families are, maybe nervous about safety? And so we really were very deliberate about starting a model in Oxen Run Park in Ward 8 that is in proximity to 5 schools. And they are moving towards partnership. So I'm telling you all of this because it will be really hard for them to go forward. Just backing up, when I say it's been successful, what I mean is that so far, the Friends of Oxen Run Park, who we're partnering with, have had 3 events, and they have another one scheduled on the 20th. And they've all been really well attended by families. And they've been very successful. So what we're hoping is that, we've talked with the DME, he's interested. We've talked to the chancellor, he's interested. We've spoken with members of OSCE. Everybody knows that this is a good idea. I think it's a matter of connecting the dots. And so that's what the coalition is trying to do. And the resolution, the idea behind the resolution is to follow up on the letter so that, for one, we are making our stand sort of, really solidifying that and keeping it present. And also, I wanted to make sure that the new members had an opportunity to weigh in because you were not present for, deciding whether to sign the letter or not. So that's sort of the purpose of doing a resolution as well. And also, the letter went directly to the mayor and was CC'd to the deputy mayor. I did follow up with him yesterday. I'm waiting to hear back just to see where he stands on that since we last spoke with him. But I would like to see this resolution, even though the recommendations are still focused on the mayor, also go to our council members, so they're aware of this. And I should mention that Brenda Richardson of Friends of Oxen Run and Laura Derringer, who's also a member of the coalition, and I spoke with Chairman Mendelson, and he's very interested in this and is planning to make outdoor learning one of the issues that they have a hearing on. So we're making progress, and I think it's a really pivotal moment because we haven't heard from the mayor yet. And I think that's kind of a good thing. I think it would be good to just back up for a second. I think the next step for us really is to get school community input, because that is sort of the missing piece at this point. And I'll explain a little bit why. It's because, this is a chicken and egg game a little bit, right? I know that principals are stretched very thin. It's hard for them to wrap their minds around outdoor learning, right? And so I haven't really brought it up with them very much, and other members may have other members of the coalition. But now that funding might come available, we need them to know that this is something they can do with support and that the resources are there to support them. So the coalition, some of us are working on a menu that principals can look at and get a sense of what is possible and what resources are available. And I will share that with you. I'm sorry I haven't done it yet. I intended to, but I'll send it to you right after the meeting. So I guess what I'm putting out there is, first of all, I'm hoping that we can pass this resolution unanimously. I think it would be very powerful and keep this issue present. I am going to follow up with an email to you all requesting that you reach out to schools in your wards to ask if they're, with this new tool that I'm going to share with you, if you think it would be helpful, to find out what the interest level is from your school leaders and what their capacity and interest is. So I'll stop there. I know I've talked a lot. Jessica.
Thanks, Emily. So you answered a bunch of questions I had about the resolution already, but one of them that is still outstanding for me is when I went on school walkthroughs with folks in Ward 6, the message I heard loud and clear was that the WTU was opposed to outdoor learning. And that was the message I got from 3 different union reps on walkthroughs, was that this was a non-starter for them. And so what I'm curious about is whether you have heard that in other wards, or are my schools just outliers? And if that is the case, what's your thoughts on a path forward for engaging with school communities if this is either not top of mind, given how complex everything else is?
Right.
So as a brief aside, I went to the LSAT meeting for the Capitol Hill Cluster School this week, and it was really anxiety producing for everyone involved. The
Yeah.
principals handled it with an incredible amount of grace and diplomacy, but teachers are very stressed about not knowing which kids are coming back, but they can't know that yet because that's all being done centrally. They also were very clear that they don't know what the tactical allowable things they can do with children are or are not. An early childhood educator said, like, what am I supposed to do when the 4-year-olds cry? Am I allowed to touch them? Am I not supposed to touch them? Am I supposed to watch them from across the room and tell them not to cry? And you listen to this and realize, like, the level of anxiety is pretty high. So if we don't have buy-in from teachers and the level of anxiety is high, what's our path forward to pushing for this to happen in schools that already have so much uncertainty?
Yeah, no, those are essential questions. I will say I have spoken with President Davis several times about this, and she is not opposed to it, but that's not the same as what you're saying. So, but I also know that there are several WTU teachers in the coalition who are working with us, and one of them has testified several times, Colin Reddick's, I'm blanking, Carter. At Mann, who's actually already doing this with his pre-K students. He's offering hybrid learning. So I think the really important piece that I'm glad you raised is this is completely voluntary at every level. So it's the idea of the funding is that it's a pot, right, that schools can apply for. They would create a plan, and it would be based on the interest, capacity, interest and capacity of their community, right? And what I've been learning is that there's already a lot that has happened in DC schools through OSSE's, environmental literacy plan work. There's the school garden club. There are like 20 schools in that program. Then there's all these partnering organizations that counterintuitively had their funding cut during this period, but had worked with DCPS previously. So for instance, there's Food Prints, does amazing work, right? And they, for those of you who don't know, Food Prints, they partner with schools. In some schools, they've actually hired a full-time teacher to be a food, like garden and nutrition teacher. And they're doing hybrid work with schools now, but their funding got cut by 2/3. And so part of it is also just like giving schools the option to tap that funding, to reinstate those partnerships. They know what to do there, right? And then I should just send you the menu right now. And so the menu kind of breaks down, like, you could have Outteach come and train your teachers. Would that be something you're interested in? If not, then don't worry about it. You know what I mean? But if you are, we are here to like help make that happen so you don't have to stress out about it. And the idea is, as you know from the letter, is to like create more options that are safer for teachers and for students. But it's by no means like telling teachers you have to do this.
Yeah, the one other thing I want to throw out that's just, I think, important to keep in mind is the timing. So one thing I know DME is working on now, and I've spoken with folks about ways the board might get involved, is summer. What's going to happen this summer? My hope is that summer is not placed on schools so that schools can prep for fall, and that summer is partnered with community orgs. So I know DME is being talked to about that. And so this is sort of one more thing. The second thing I'll note is that that $10 million that was announced for charter schools, and Jacques can speak, I think, even more eloquently to this. One, it's not from the CARES Act fund. We don't really know where the money is coming from. It's hard to get that information. Two, 24 million was already spent on DCPS HVAC. So this is an effort to try to make charters whole, even though it's less than half what was spent on DCPS outside of their budget. And three, even with the announcement of that money, it's not expected to be available to charters until April. Oh. So they've announced the money, but there's no grant program created to actually hand it out. And so as I think about this notion of getting $4 million out the door, if $10 million for essential things like air filtration might take till April, what's a reasonable timeline to expect $4 million being found and made available to schools, to be asking schools to make plans for what they would do with this money if we probably can't imagine it getting to them before June?
Yeah, no, and that's a fair question. I think if that's the case, like if it doesn't get to them till June, it's still a boon, you know, because as you pointed out, I think it was you know, talking about really needing to have, to plan for summer engagement, because students are going to need it, both for academic side and also because they need to be social, and then, you know, they have all kinds of social emotional needs. And I think that that would be a great time. You know, we should be, and Jessica, I think it's such an important point, actually. I'm glad you raised it, which is that I feel like we are constantly pedaling fast to make up for what we haven't done yet, right? Like we're trying to make up for what didn't happen that we were trying to make happen 3 months ago. We should be planning for the summer. We should be planning.
I'd actually love to see us think about this outdoor learning piece as a, what could we do with summer? As opposed to, this is an alternative to reopening. And I say that because I think you're right. Like, we're doing a lot of backpedaling. We're doing a lot of listening to what people say they needed 3 months ago and trying to get it for them a month from now. And I think if we think instead about 5 months from now, we might actually be able to help shape that conversation.
So do you think that should be explicit?
I think it would be helpful. I think it would also push this resolution to be something that we could, one, build on the letter to the mayor, and two, see more reasonably get implemented.
Yeah. Okay. No, that makes sense. I'd like to hear other thoughts.
I'll be quiet now, but I'll say more when it's helpful.
And Alistair, I mean, ostensibly it would be, actually, I'm not sure where it would be housed. I mean, that would be a conversation with the mayor. I mean, it could be through the mayor's office. It could be through DPR. It could be, you know, through OSSI. There are several agencies that handle grants, but the idea, what's that?
Here's the big problem, just as I look at it from what happens with money when it gets to schools.
Mm-hmm.
Once the principal gets money that's like not designated specifically.
Oh, it has to be designated. Yeah, no,
I understand that, but that's nice to think that way. But once that money gets to the schools and this principal needs more toilet paper, I'm not trying to be sarcastic about it. You know, that money disappears. So it's got to be really, really targeted, and it's got to be really well thought out. And there's got to be an advocate in the systems.
I agree.
To make sure that that money is channeled specifically for what it's supposed to be used for.
That's a great point.
I've seen too much money go to schools, and all of a sudden it disappears. And once it disappears, it's gone forever. And in those, and a lot of times if you don't use the money, then it goes back into the general fund downtown and you lose the money. So I think that what Jessica's saying is I love the idea of outdoor education. I think it's fabulous and I know it's working, but it's like sort of an out there kind of a concept. People need to be educated on what it is rather than this hippy dippy kind of going out in nature and
Right.
doing things that a lot of people, when you say outdoor learning, that's what they hear.
Right. No, and that's really important. And that's what we're trying to do is, present as many existing examples as we can. But to your point, Fraser, I'm wondering if we should add to the therefore clause something about a coordinator being part of this, creating a role. Maybe that's asking too much, but I do think it's really important.
At this point, if you're trying to get the money into the program quickly, once you put another layer of leadership or responsibility, that's gonna be working against yourself.
So as a chair, I'm going to interrupt because there's nobody calling me, so I'm going to interrupt. So I was just rereading the resolution. I hadn't really thought that it was so closely focused on just term 3 as opposed to summer. And what I think would be useful, I agree with Jessica. I think it'd be great to have this teed up for the summer. I also think that based on what I see, that it's true, there's a bunch of places that aren't ready to do this, don't want to, and there's a bunch of places that do. And my guess is once you have people being required to come back to school in February, there might well be a lot of interest in being able to do some of the learning outdoors in some different ways. So my suggestion would be to, on that whereas about currently term 2 and 3, to broaden that, even have a whole whereas and a resolve that really is about teeing this up for the summer. The other thing I think might be useful would be to have, possibly just a couple of bullets about the kinds of things that would fund in a more very concrete way, just because it gets people to understand what we're talking about. And as to some of the other stuff, I would just say, and I'm open to other people who know the legislative process better than me, but it seems to me this is going to, whatever we put in our resolution and whatever we try to do, it's going to catch hold and there's going to be a champion at the council who's going to work this through and they're going to add and subtract to it based on lots of things. And that for us, it's to put out the money is important, the timing is important, the kinds of things it would go for are important. And then, exactly how it gets organized, I think there's going to be folks at the council who are going to be in a better position to decide that. So I'm not sure I'd get all into that in the resolution, but. And I want to say one other thing as we go forward, which is, again, because this is our first meeting, sort of the way we have done resolutions, just so everybody knows, is by rule, you have to bring something up first at a working meeting before it goes to the board meeting. That doesn't always have to be a completely written out resolution. Sometimes it's a discussion of it, it's a paragraph, but where we can bring a whole resolution to a prior board meeting, it's great. You get this kind of discussion and then people are in a position to make an even better resolution to come back to the main meeting. The other thing is typically the way these have worked, more so when they're more controversial, and I don't know that this one is, but we'll see, is there can be a lot of back and forth between the working meeting and the final meeting so that we all have a chance to try to figure out how to make something palatable and exciting to as many people as possible. And a lot of that goes on by phone. A lot of that goes on by email between these two meetings. So I just want to, like I said, I'm not sure this falls into that category, but maybe it does, but just wanted to put that out there.
That's helpful.
Any other comments, questions, issues, concerns on this? All right.
I'm going to follow up with an email with some information and just a request. Alistair, did you have something else?
Yeah, no, I'm still thinking this through, but you came to my neighborhood and saw some of our outdoor learning pilots, and I'm just thinking through the difference between, me as a private citizen convening neighbors to do outdoor story time in the park next to my house, right? Versus schools doing it as part of their daily routine, right? And that I'm not sure. You know, the summer idea makes sense to me, in part because as I've even for us as just neighborhood volunteers to do it right, it's been background checks, making sure everyone has the right forms. Already we've gotten complaints and people have very different ideas of what 6 feet apart is, and how close can the person who's facilitating walk to and anyone else. Does the parent need to physically be there at all times? What happens if the kids get too close to one another? Who manages that? To pull 2 people apart, can the facilitator get closer to the kids if the parent's not there? We were left with a lot of questions, actually. And I think if it's parent opt-in, that's one thing. If it's teacher opt-in, that's one thing. That's right. And those all make sense to me. But I do think that there's a different set of liability, right, for schools to take this on. And I'm not sure what I would want to look at what other states are doing again, right? I mean, we know that this is happening. This has happened in previous epidemics.
Alistair, it's happening here. There's Bria is doing it.
That's fair.
And
Yep.
there are schools, like I said, Man is doing it on a small scale. So the idea, and I think, the question you raise about liability is more of a problem for you as a private citizen than it is for a school where you already have teachers who are there. They don't, they're all set. And then there are the partner organizations that make this possible, really. That's sort of the key piece. And they already have been doing this. So let's talk.
Yeah.
And I will sort of explain more about this because I agree with you. And it's interesting. I know that Laura is like really charging hard for the sort of extra, like folks like all of us to do these out of school time things. And I think that's great. But I feel like it's a lot of energy, as you've pointed out, for not a very large return, to be honest. And what I want to see is this at a much larger scale so that more students benefit from it. Plain and simple. Right now, I think, I didn't even mention this, but the timing, I thought this is what you were going to say, Jessica, about the timing of the, term 3 reopening is right after, people are returning from holiday and numbers are spiking, and I think this is an important alternative for families and teachers who do not feel safe returning inside because, outdoor learning is shown to greatly, or just being outside in general, mitigates the spread of the virus. And you're right, that you still need to be 6 feet apart. You still need to be wearing a mask. It doesn't mean that you can forgo those safety precautions. And I think that's still hard. But again, that's where I think having money to be able to hire extra staff, to be able to hire a partner organization that has already been doing this throughout the pandemic will be key. Because otherwise, they're like, this is a great idea. I can't do it. And so when I said it's about connecting the dots at this point, the resources are there. DC is amazing. We have so many resources, including within the system itself. OSSI has been doing amazing work, and it has halted because of coordination. Like, we don't know which students might come back, and it's too much to ask of principals. And again, I think what I'm seeing our role is now is to make that easier for principals to figure that out. Ruth. Can't hear you, Ruth.
Madam President, you're muted.
So unless there's anything people are dying to say, or we need to keep going on this, I'm going to move us forward. We know what's on the table. People should feel free to reach out to Emily. She's going to be sending us stuff. And we got some new ideas to sort of put in there and to worry about and think about. I know Jean-Paul has something to raise under new business. Is there anything else?
Ruth, should we raise the question that a principal asked us?
Oh, yeah. Jean-Paul, do you have any information on the vaccination issue? On the vaccine issue?
Not as of yet, but I can summarize the questions that I posed if you want.
Well, let me just start it by saying I've gotten a number of emails. One of them was also to Emily, and I'm guessing others have got them as well, perhaps, from principals who are trying to rally support for making sure that as the vaccine availability spreads away from the healthcare system, that, and as it spreads into the schools, to education personnel, that it be clear that people who are going to be working in the school are prioritized. And that struck us as an important point. And so I talked to Jean-Paul about trying to get more information from the mayor about the extent to which that was an issue or it wasn't an issue, and just to try to get us to a point where we could advocate for that, assuming there was desire either as individuals or as a board to do that.
Dr. Sutter, if you don't mind 1 second, let me just update on what I've heard, and then we can get to some questions. So I did pose that question to the EOC, the Emergency Operations Center folks, to ask, sort of who in DC Health should we be giving this, these questions to, who can we ask, and those types of things. And the response back, to be fair, I also sent this email on Tuesday. And so yesterday was a little busy with other things in the Emergency Operations Center, but I did follow up again today, and they are working on trying to figure out some of these questions. And it's my understanding that the advisory committee that the mayor set up that has a number of public health experts and those types of things are the ones that have been advising on the timelining of these processes. But from the information that we saw from the mayor's press conference on Monday, school staff, which is how it's listed, right, is school staff are going to start to be eligible for the 1B category of vaccines starting on January 25th. So, Ruth, do you want me to handle questions, or do you want to?
No, Jessica.
So I'll put the link in the chat. I was just finding it, but Perry Stein has an article that came out this evening that says, Bowser announced this week that the city plans to begin vaccinating daycare and school workers on January 25th. Reopening will not be linked to vaccinations. Staff members scheduled to work in person in buildings in February will be prioritized within that list. Vaccination will not be required.
So perhaps that is also
members to work in person.
So you'll thank you very much.
Which could be looked at as real something that's not even legal, because that could be looked at as, they're trying to force me to go back to work so I can get vaccinated.
No, it doesn't. They are not required to go back.
I thought that you said the staff persons who, I'm sorry, I didn't hear.
They'll be prioritized, but they will not be required to get vaccinated. So if I'm a teacher who is told to go back in person, I will be at the top of the list to get my vaccination, but I don't have to as a condition of employment.
But
if I'm a teacher who doesn't want to go back to work, I'm not in that group, right?
Well, unfortunately, at this point, you're not going to have the option, at least at this moment, to say, I don't want to go back to work.
Right. If you're told you're going back, you have to go back.
Teachers who aren't going back because they have pre-existing conditions or whatever. I mean, there are a lot of teachers that have notes from the doctor.
Yeah.
Going back.
Then they would not be prioritized, I don't think, if they're virtual.
That doesn't sound like it's legal to me. I don't know. I'm just saying.
Well, I mean, the vaccine is the whole idea of the prioritization is a combination of, who most needs it, given both their health and what they're doing. So I don't know
Ruth,
why we-
wasn't the principal's question actually, could we ask for staff who have been in schools already since December to be prioritized? So
Yeah, I think that's harder. I think that's a harder ask, frankly. But
Yeah, but that
We
was
don't
the
have
question.
anything to do with that, do we? I don't think we have anything to do with that.
We don't have anything, but we could advocate. So it's just a question if it's even possible. I don't know. And I think it's worth just raising it if anyone has thoughts or questions. I don't know.
I think that from what Jessica said, that's what that is, though. The people that have already been in the buildings.
No, it's people who are scheduled to go back in February. And that's what this principal specified. She's like, she knew that, but then she was asking, could we actually bump it up so that, folks who have been in the building already or, have to be back now are prioritized, and then the people who have to come back in February. So
Carlene.
Just for clarification, so the ask from the principal is for us to do what?
Well, I think there's different asks. So that's why I didn't want to get too focused on this one thing. I think on principals in general, I want to say, I don't know that it's all exactly the same, are very concerned to make sure that the staff that is required to come back, that once there is a vaccine available, that staff who are in the schools will be prioritized above staff in the same category that's not in person, right? I think that was the concern.
Okay,
and then there's an additional concern that Emily was raising about, can you prioritize the people based on when they went back to work? And I mean, that's it.
Well, for whatever it's worth, I just kind of curious if we can just lay it on the table as educators in general to prepare the workforce for even later down the line, because when you're competing with the general public, just I don't know, something to think about, but I'm not sure where the conversation would go, but I'm just kind of curious if we could just elevate teachers, educators.
So teachers, educators, and Jean Paul, you can respond. Teachers, education staff is pretty high on the list, right? It's right after healthcare workers. And there's sort of a large category that's essential workers. But it includes school staff, way higher than everybody else.
It's with people over 75.
Right. Well, Fraser will be there first, but once Fraser's done. Does that respond, Carlene, to that point?
Yes, I think to the point about just where the education field is in general. It's interesting to hear the match about going back and then the timeline, because we know the vaccine is taken in doses. But yeah, I'm just kind of curious to hear what the principal, I guess as a follow-up item, would like for the board to do.
I think we may have lost Ruth. Are there additional questions on this this item? Okay, seeing none, I'll go back to the one item that I have, and that relates to the all teacher survey, which we sent out information for the board members to send to the schools, the public charter schools in their wards, to ask them to participate. And I'm not going to use my shame finger, but if you have not done so, please do so. Please use the materials that we've sent to you to encourage all of the PCS public charter schools in the district to participate in this survey. It is going to be a really interesting survey, and we really need participation from across the district to make it the best possible that we can. So if you can't find that information, feel free to email me again and I'll send it to you. But other than that, that's the shame of the day. Yes, Dr. Sutter.
If you represent a Center City public charter school, you do not have to include them on your list because they have already replied that they will participate.
Yes. Any other business that we need to discuss? Hey, Reggie.
Two quick things, John Paul.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, say hi.
Hi.
Okay, say
For
hi.
members, for the upcoming retreat, we will delve into the equity framework. Next week, you will get a primer that the staff has put together. Shout out to Darren, who's worked hard in putting that together. I'm just giving you context. The primer is just to explain the process. And then last year with the framework, Jessica, Frazier, Ruth put together different components. And so we're gonna, at the retreat, just talk about like how we might operationalize the framework. So more to come next week, but when you get that email, that is the context for. Nothing for you to do. We're going to delve into it at the retreat. The second thing is we are 3 weeks away from our February working session. Time is flying already. The ambitious hope is that we might advance priorities, committee structures, any potential changes. I even got a text from Alex about bylaws changes. And yes, Alex, you can propose changes. Given that we're 3 weeks away, instead of everyone coming to that meeting with separate proposals, I'm going to just be working either to pull you all together in groups or grab 30 minutes here or there just to talk about the changes. I know some of you have already seen the document. Some of you have not. Just giving you your heads up there. We cannot talk about it we cannot talk about it at the retreat for the reasons John Paul has already mentioned, which means we will not have a time between now and the working session. So I will find time, but those are the two things I wanted to flag for you. And Alex, if you do have proposals for the bylaws changes, let's just talk so that we can round it all up together in one.
Great. So I am not a member of the board, so I can't actually adjourn the board, but our senior member, thank you. You can call for motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Lovely evening, everybody. Thank you.
Yay, first meeting members. Bye.
Great seeing everybody.